Important notice, this is the audiobook. If you would like access to the digital book, ebook version, to read later, the link is in the first pinned comment. The river that doesn't fight the stones. There's a creek that runs behind the small cabin where I often retreat to write. Every morning, I watch the water make its patient journey around weathered granite boulders, never once attempting to argue with their ancient presence. The water doesn't strain or struggle. It simply finds the most natural path, carving smooth channels through stone that has stood for millennia. This quiet morning ritual has become my greatest teacher. I want to begin our journey together with this image because it holds the essence of what we'll explore, a way of moving through life that paradoxically achieves more by forcing less. You picked up this book, perhaps, because somewhere deep within you recognizes that there must be a more graceful way to navigate the complexities of modern existence. That intuition is not mistaken. We live in a culture that has made a religion of effort. We're taught that more force equals better results, that pushing harder is always the solution, that if something isn't working, we simply need to try with greater intensity. But watch that creek outside my window for just a few minutes, and you'll witness a different kind of power, one that accomplishes extraordinary things through what the ancient Chinese called wu wei, or effortless action. This isn't about becoming passive or withdrawing from life's challenges. The creek isn't weak, it's carving through solid rock. But it's doing so by following natural principles that our hurried, forcing minds have largely forgotten. When we learn to align with these same principles, work becomes less exhausting, relationships grow more harmonious, and we discover that our deepest desires often fulfill themselves when we stop chasing them so desperately. I've spent decades studying and living this ancient wisdom, watching how it transforms not just individual lives but entire ways of being in the world. The promise I offer you isn't magical thinking or naive optimism. It's something far more practical and immediate, the recognition that you already possess everything needed to live with greater ease, effectiveness, and joy. You've simply been looking in the wrong direction. Think of the moments in your life when everything felt effortless, when you were so absorbed in an activity that time seemed to disappear, when words flowed perfectly in an important conversation, when solutions appeared just as you stopped desperately seeking them. These weren't accidents. They were glimpses of your natural state, moments when you accidentally stopped fighting the current of life and allowed yourself to be carried by something larger and wiser than your striving mind. The path we'll walk together over the coming pages is designed to make those moments less accidental and more accessible. Not through complex techniques or rigid disciplines, but through the gentle art of remembering what you already know in your bones. That resistance creates turbulence, while flowing with natural rhythms creates both peace and extraordinary power. You'll discover why the executive who stopped micromanaging saw productivity soar, how the parent who released control found deeper connection with their children, and why the artist who ceased forcing creativity began producing their most inspired work. These aren't isolated stories but examples of universal principles that apply whether you're navigating corporate boardrooms, family dynamics, or the intimate landscape of your own heart. But first, we must honestly acknowledge where most of us find ourselves, swimming upstream against the current of life, exhausted from battles that don't need to be fought, wondering why our sincere efforts so often produce the opposite of what we intended. This recognition isn't meant to discourage you, it's the beginning of freedom. Pause here for a moment of reflection. Notice your breathing right now. Are you holding tension somewhere in your body as you read these words? What would it feel like to allow your shoulders to soften, your jaw to relax? This simple awareness is already the beginning of Wu Wei, noticing where you're creating unnecessary effort and gently allowing it to dissolve. Here's another contemplation to carry with you. Think of one area in your life where you've been pushing hard for results. What might happen if, instead of pushing harder, you stepped back and asked what the situation itself is trying to teach you? Sometimes the obstacle isn't blocking the path, it is the path. Your first practice begins now, in this moment. For the next day, simply notice when you catch yourself forcing, whether it's trying to make someone understand your point, rushing through traffic, or pushing your body when it needs rest. You don't need to change anything yet. Just notice. This gentle observation is how all lasting transformation begins. The river outside my window has carved canyons through mountains, not through violence, but through the patient application of its essential nature. You, too, have an essential nature, and when you learn to move from that place, mountains move for you as well. This is our invitation, to remember the way of water, to rediscover the path of natural power, to come home to the effortless effort that is your birthright. The journey begins not with doing something new, but with gently undoing what was never necessary in the first place. The river knows the way. So, dear friend, do you? The swimmer fighting the current. There is a swimmer I know well, perhaps you know them too. Every morning, they dive into the waters of life with fierce determination, arms cutting through the waves with calculated precision. They have studied all the techniques, read every manual on proper form, and their stroke is technically flawless. Yet each evening, they drag themselves to shore more exhausted than when they began, their muscles aching not from the joy of movement but from the relentless battle against forces they cannot see. This swimmer believes, as our culture has taught them to believe, that success comes from swimming harder, faster, with more intensity than the day before. When the current pushes back, they push forward with double force. When the water grows turbulent, they thrash more violently, certain that they can conquer any obstacle. What they haven't yet discovered is that the very force they're fighting is the same force that could carry them home. I watch the swimmer because I once was this swimmer. And perhaps, in the quiet moments between your busy days, you recognize something of yourself in this image too. The exhaustion that runs deeper than physical tiredness. The sense that despite all your effort, you're moving through life with far more struggle than seems necessary. The nagging suspicion that there must be another way. The addiction to control. We live in a world that worships at the altar of control. From the moment we learn to walk, we're taught that good things come to those who force them to happen. Work harder, push through, overcome obstacles with sheer determination. This isn't inherently wrong, there's a time and place for focused effort. But somewhere in our collective psyche, we've confused activity with progress, struggle with strength, and control with security. I see this addiction everywhere, in the executive who checks emails at 3 a.m., believing that constant vigilance equals leadership, in the parent who overschedules their children's lives, confusing busyness with good parenting, in the lover who tries to change their partner, mistaking manipulation for care. We've become a culture of swimmers fighting the current, and we've forgotten that rivers naturally flow toward the sea. This addiction to control reveals itself in subtle ways. Notice how your body tenses when plans change unexpectedly. Feel the spike of anxiety when someone doesn't respond to your message immediately. Observe the way your mind creates elaborate scenarios to avoid uncertainty. These reactions aren't personal failings, they're symptoms of a deeper conditioning that has taught us to view life as something to be wrestled into submission rather than danced with. The irony is profound. The more tightly we grip, the more likely our dreams are to slip through our fingers. The harder we chase, the faster what we desire seems to run away. This isn't cosmic cruelty, it's natural law. When we approach life with clenched fists and rigid expectations, we create the very resistance we're trying to overcome. The exhaustion of constant doing. There's a particular kind of fatigue that has become epidemic in our time, not just physical tiredness, but a bone-deep weariness of the soul. It's the exhaustion that comes from treating every day like a mountain to be conquered rather than a garden to be tended. I call this the exhaustion of constant doing, and it affects far more than our energy levels. When we operate from this place of relentless activity, we disconnect from the natural rhythms that govern all life. We work through lunch because productivity matters more than nourishment. We multitask our way through conversations because efficiency trumps connection. We fill every quiet moment with stimulation because stillness feels uncomfortable, even threatening. But notice what happens in nature. Trees don't grow at the same rate year-round. They have seasons of expansion and seasons of rest. Rivers don't flow at constant velocity, they meander through valleys and rush over falls according to the landscape they encounter. Even your own heart rests between beats, and your lungs pause between breaths. Yet somehow, we've decided that human life should be exempt from these natural patterns. The symptoms of this exhaustion go far beyond feeling tired. You might notice that your creativity feels stagnant, as if you're drawing from an empty well. Your relationships may feel effortful rather than nourishing. Decision-making becomes increasingly difficult because your inner compass is drowned out by the noise of endless doing. You might find yourself going through the motions of your life while feeling disconnected from any deeper sense of purpose or joy. This isn't a sign that you're weak or lazy, it's your system's intelligent response to an unsustainable way of living. Your exhaustion is actually a form of wisdom, a signal that something needs to shift. Like a fever that burns away infection, this fatigue is trying to redirect you toward a more natural and sustainable rhythm. Forcing what wants to flow. Perhaps nowhere is our struggle with the current more evident than in our relationships. We enter connections with hidden agendas, trying to shape others into versions that fit our needs and expectations. We love conditionally, offering affection in exchange for specific behaviors. We communicate to convince rather than to understand, and we wonder why intimacy feels so elusive. I think of the parent who micromanages their teenager's choices, then can't understand why the child grows more distant. The friend who gives advice that sounds suspiciously like attempts to control. The partner who believes their role is to fix or improve their beloved. In each case, love gets confused with management, and connection suffers. The same pattern shows up in our relationship with opportunities and outcomes. We pursue goals with such intensity that we miss better possibilities that want to emerge. We network strategically rather than connecting authentically, then wonder why professional relationships feel hollow. We try to force timing that isn't ripe, like pulling fruit from a tree before it's ready. What if, instead of approaching life as something to be managed and manipulated, we began to see it as an intelligence we could collaborate with? What if our role isn't to control outcomes but to show up with full presence and genuine intention, then remain open to responses we couldn't have orchestrated? This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning all goals. It means distinguishing between aligned action and forced action. Aligned action feels energizing even when it's challenging. It has a quality of rightness that your body recognizes. Forced action feels like swimming upstream, exhausting, with limited results despite maximum effort. The anxiety compass. Here's something I've learned that might surprise you. Anxiety is often not a problem to be solved but a compass pointing toward where you're fighting the current. That knot in your stomach when you're trying to control a situation? That's information. The sleepless nights when you're forcing a decision? Your system is telling you something important. Most of us have been taught to see anxiety as an enemy to be conquered or a weakness to be hidden. But what if it's actually guidance in disguise? What if that uncomfortable feeling is your inner wisdom saying, this approach isn't aligned? There's another way? I notice that when I'm truly in flow with life, moving with natural timing and responding rather than forcing, anxiety decreases dramatically. Not because external circumstances are perfect, but because I'm not exhausting myself swimming against the current. The challenges are still there, but my relationship to them has fundamentally shifted. This doesn't mean all anxiety is simply about swimming upstream. Sometimes our nervous systems need professional support to recalibrate. But it's worth asking, in what areas of your life does anxiety spike? What are you trying to control that might want to unfold differently? Where are you pushing when you might experiment with allowing? The cost of resistance. The swimmer fighting the current pays a price that goes far beyond physical exhaustion. There's an invisible cost to living in constant resistance to what is, a cost measured not just in energy but in joy, creativity, and the capacity for genuine connection. When we're locked in battle with life, we miss the subtle beauty that exists in every moment. We're so focused on our agenda that we can't receive the gifts that want to find us. We become like tourists who are so busy checking items off their itinerary that they never really see the places they're visiting. Resistance also creates a particular kind of loneliness. When we're constantly trying to reshape reality to match our preferences, we're essentially saying that life as it is isn't acceptable. This puts us at odds not just with external circumstances but with the fundamental nature of existence itself. We become strangers in our own lives. But perhaps the greatest cost is the way resistance cuts us off from our own natural intelligence. When we're gripping tightly to how we think things should go, we can't hear the quiet voice of intuition that might guide us towards something better. We become deaf to the subtle signals that could redirect us toward paths of less resistance and greater fulfillment. The call to something different. Yet even in the midst of this struggle, something in you knows there's another way. You wouldn't be reading these words if part of you hadn't already sensed that the path of force and control, while sometimes necessary, isn't your only option. Somewhere in your cells, you carry the memory of what it feels like to be in flow, those moments when action arose naturally, when the right words came without effort, when solutions appeared just when you needed them. Maybe you remember it from childhood, the way hours could disappear when you were absorbed in play, how creativity flowed like water when you weren't trying to make it happen. Or perhaps you've touched it in moments of crisis, when the situation was so far beyond your control that you had no choice but to respond from a deeper place of presence and trust. These glimpses aren't accidents or lucky breaks. They're previews of what becomes possible when we learn to work with the current rather than against it. They're reminders that beneath all our learned patterns of struggle, there exists a more natural way of being, a way that honors both your deep desires and the intelligence of life itself. The invitation before us isn't to abandon all effort or responsibility. It's to discover what the ancient Taoists called Wu Wei, action that arises from stillness, effort that doesn't feel forced, a way of moving through life that is both powerful and gentle, like water slowly carving canyons through stone. Moments of recognition. As you sit with these words, you might notice something shifting in your awareness. Perhaps a recognition of how much energy you've been spending swimming against currents you cannot see. Or maybe a softening around some situation you've been trying to control, a willingness to consider that there might be another approach. Take a moment now to feel into your body. Where are you holding tension? What would it be like to let your shoulders drop just slightly, to allow your breath to deepen? This simple act of relaxation isn't giving up, it's making space for a different kind of intelligence to emerge. Consider this: what is one area of your life where you've been swimming upstream? What situation have you been approaching with more force than seems to be working? Hold this gently in your awareness, not to solve it but simply to acknowledge it. Sometimes the first step toward flow is simply recognizing where we've been fighting the current. Think back to a time when something you wanted came to you with surprising ease. Perhaps a job opportunity that found you when you weren't looking, a relationship that blossomed naturally, or a solution that appeared when you finally stopped struggling to figure it out. What was different about your internal state during those experiences? How did it feel to move with life rather than against it? This isn't about blaming yourself for the times you've struggled or forced. That, too, is part of the human experience. But there's great power in recognizing that you have more choices than you might have realized. The current of life isn't your enemy, it's an intelligence you can learn to read, trust, and ultimately dance with. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore exactly how to make this shift from fighting to flowing, from controlling to collaborating. But for now, simply let yourself feel the possibility that there might be an easier way. That the exhaustion you've been carrying isn't inevitable. That life itself might be more interested in supporting you than you've dared to believe. The swimmer who learns to read the current doesn't stop swimming, they discover that the water itself wants to help them reach the shore. The ancient roots of a timeless wisdom. I invite you to travel with me through the mists of time, back to an era when the world moved more slowly, when the song of cicadas marked the hours instead of digital notifications, and when wisdom was discovered not in libraries but in the patient observation of how water finds its way around stones. Picture, if you will, an old man walking along a dusty path in ancient China. His beard flows like morning mist, his eyes hold the depth of still ponds, and his steps fall so naturally upon the earth that even the smallest insects continue their work undisturbed as he passes. This man, whose very name has become synonymous with the mysterious force that moves all things, carries within himself a secret that has the power to transform not just individual lives, but the very way humanity relates to existence itself. I am speaking, of course, of Lao Tzu, and the revolutionary understanding he offered to the world through his cryptic verses about the Tao, that ineffable source from which all things emerge and to which all things return. But more than historical curiosity, what he discovered about the nature of effortless action, of Wu Wei, speaks directly to the heart of our modern struggles with burnout, anxiety, and the exhausting pursuit of control over uncontrollable forces. As I sit here now, feeling the ancient wisdom flowing through these words like water through cupped hands, I sense how desperately our contemporary world needs to remember what our ancestors understood intuitively, that there is a way of moving through life that requires less effort yet accomplishes more, that demands less force yet creates greater influence, that asks for less control yet produces more authentic results. The Tao Te Ching begins with perhaps the most profound statement ever written about the nature of reality: the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. In these simple words lies an entire revolution of understanding. For here is wisdom acknowledging its own limitations, truth pointing beyond itself, knowledge that remains humble before the mystery it attempts to describe. This is our first lesson in Wu Wei. Even our seeking must be held lightly, even our desire for understanding must not become a grasping that drives away the very thing we hope to embrace. When I contemplate these ancient verses, I feel myself settling into a different rhythm, like a bird that stops fighting the wind and discovers how to soar upon invisible currents. The Tao, you see, is not something we can grasp with our analytical minds, not a concept to be mastered or a technique to be perfected. It is more like the fragrance of jasmine on an evening breeze. The moment you try to capture it, cup it in your hands, or bottle it for later, it dissolves into something else entirely. This is why Lao Tzu spoke in paradoxes and riddles, in images drawn from the natural world rather than abstract philosophical arguments. He understood that the deepest truths can only be approached sideways, like a deer that will flee if you march directly toward it but might allow you near if you sit quietly by the forest edge, patient as the trees themselves. The principle of naturalness, what the ancient sages called Ziren, flows through every line of classical Taoist wisdom like an underground river feeding countless springs. Ziren means that which is so of itself, that which arises spontaneously without force or artificial intervention. Watch a flower opening to the morning sun, and you witness Ziren. Observe how your breath naturally deepens when you step into a forest, and you experience Ziren. Notice how laughter bubbles up when you hear something genuinely funny, and you encounter Ziren. In our culture of constant optimization and improvement, of life hacks and performance enhancement, the radical simplicity of Ziren can feel almost threatening. We have been conditioned to believe that anything worthwhile must be earned through struggle, that natural impulses cannot be trusted, that spontaneity leads to chaos. Yet when I observe the natural world, and I have spent countless hours in such observation, I see the opposite truth revealing itself with stunning clarity. Consider the way a tree grows. Does it strain and struggle, setting goals for how tall it should be by next year? Does it compare itself to neighboring trees and develop elaborate strategies for optimal growth? Does it lie awake at night worrying about whether it's reaching its full potential? Of course not. Yet somehow, through this effortless unfolding according to its inner nature and environmental conditions, it achieves a kind of perfection that no amount of human striving could improve upon. This is the essence of Ziren, action that arises from our authentic nature rather than from societal expectations, family pressures, or ego-driven ambitions. It is the difference between a river flowing toward the ocean because that is simply what rivers do, and a machine pumping water uphill because someone programmed it to do so. But here we must be careful not to fall into the common misunderstanding that naturalness means lack of cultivation or refinement. A master musician playing a complex piece with seeming effortlessness has not achieved this through laziness or natural talent alone, but through years of practice that eventually becomes so integrated that technique disappears into pure expression. Similarly, Ziren in human life often requires deep inner work to clear away the accumulated layers of conditioning that obscure our natural wisdom and spontaneous responsiveness. This brings us to one of the most beautiful and mysterious aspects of Taoist philosophy, the dynamic interplay of yin and yang. In the familiar symbol, we see not two opposing forces locked in eternal conflict, but a flowing dance where each contains the seed of the other, where darkness curves into light and light spirals into darkness in an endless, graceful transformation. Most of us learn to think of yin and yang as opposite qualities, feminine and masculine, passive and active, soft and hard. But spending time with this ancient wisdom reveals something far more nuanced and practical. Yin and yang are not fixed states but movements, tendencies, moments in an ongoing flow. They are like the inhale and exhale of existence itself, each necessary for the completion of the other. In practical terms, this means that effective action often requires periods of receptive waiting, that speaking powerfully depends upon knowing when to remain silent, that achieving goals may involve strategic retreat, that strength sometimes manifests as flexibility rather than rigidity. A skilled martial artist embodies this principle perfectly, yielding when force is applied, striking when an opening appears, always responsive to the changing conditions of each moment rather than locked into predetermined strategies. I often think of a conversation I once had with a master gardener who had tended the same piece of land for over 40 years. The secret, she told me, her weathered hands gentle on a young seedling, is knowing when to intervene and when to trust the plant's own wisdom. Too much attention can be as harmful as too little. Some days I work intensively, preparing soil or pruning branches. Other days, the most important thing I can do is simply walk among the plants, observing, listening, allowing them to teach me what they need. This is yin and yang in action, the dynamic balance between doing and being, effort and ease, planning and spontaneity. It requires what I call exquisite timing, a sensitivity to the natural rhythms and cycles that govern all growth and change. But perhaps the most challenging concept for our achievement-oriented culture to grasp is the distinction between inaction and wu wei. They may appear similar on the surface, both involve not doing, but they arise from fundamentally different places and lead to radically different outcomes. Inaction often springs from fear, confusion, or overwhelm. It is the paralysis we feel when faced with too many choices, the procrastination that emerges when we doubt our abilities, the withdrawal that follows disappointment or failure. Inaction carries the energy of resistance, of turning away from life's demands and opportunities. Wu wei, by contrast, is pregnant with potential. It is the poised stillness of a cat watching a mouse hole, alert and ready but not yet moving. It is the conductor's raised baton in the moment before the orchestra begins, the archer's breath held just before release, the writer's pause as the perfect word emerges from silence. Wu wei contains action within apparent non-action, like a seed that appears dormant but is actually organizing all its energy for the moment when conditions align for sprouting. I remember sitting by a mountain stream one autumn afternoon, watching leaves fall into the water. Some leaves struggled against the current, catching on rocks and debris, eventually becoming waterlogged and sinking. Others seemed to dance with the flow, spinning and gliding, traveling much farther downstream with no apparent effort. Both types of leaves were subject to the same current, but their relationship to that current determined their journey entirely. This image has become for me a perfect metaphor for the difference between forced action and wu wei. When we operate from wu wei, we maintain our authentic intention and direction while remaining fluid in our methods, responsive to changing circumstances, willing to take unexpected detours when they serve our deeper purpose. This brings us to Te, a concept that has no direct equivalent in Western philosophy but is essential for understanding how wu wei actually works in practice. Te is often translated as virtue, but this English word carries moral and religious connotations that can obscure its true meaning. Te is more like natural power or authentic influence, the kind of magnetism that draws opportunities and allies without manipulation or coercion. A person with strong Te doesn't need to convince others of their worth or competence, their very presence communicates these qualities. They don't need to chase success, success seems to find them in the most unexpected ways. They don't exhaust themselves trying to control outcomes, somehow the outcomes align with their deepest intentions as if by magic. But Te is not a skill to be learned or a technique to be mastered. It emerges naturally when we align our actions with our authentic nature, when our external behavior reflects our inner truth, when we stop trying to be someone other than who we actually are. Te is what happens when the mask falls away and we discover that our real face is far more beautiful than any persona we could construct. I think of Te as the power of genuine presence, the quality that allows a whispered word to carry more weight than a shouted command, a gentle suggestion to be more influential than aggressive persuasion, a simple example to inspire more transformation than elaborate theories. Cultivating Te requires what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, the ability to approach each situation with fresh eyes, free from the burden of preconceptions and expectations. The beginner's mind sees possibilities where the expert sees only problems, discovers solutions where the experienced person sees only obstacles, finds wonder where the sophisticated person sees only the mundane. This doesn't mean abandoning knowledge or experience, but holding them lightly, remaining open to new information, willing to be surprised, humble enough to be taught by unexpected teachers, including circumstances that initially appear frustrating or disappointing. I recall a story about a famous chef who spent a year working in his grandmother's kitchen, not to learn new recipes but to rediscover the joy of simple cooking. "She taught me nothing new," he said afterward, "and everything I had forgotten. How to taste with my whole being, how to feel when the dough is ready, how to cook with love instead of technique. All my culinary education had filled my mind with knowledge but emptied my hands of wisdom." This is the gift of beginner's mind. It returns us to direct experience, to the raw immediacy of life before it gets filtered through our concepts and categories. It allows us to respond to what is actually happening rather than to our assumptions about what should be happening. As we begin to embody these ancient principles in our daily lives, something remarkable occurs. The frantic energy that characterizes so much of modern existence begins to settle into a different rhythm. We find ourselves moving through our days with less strain but more effectiveness, less anxiety but more appropriate response, less force but more authentic power. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, nor does it require us to retreat from the world or abandon our responsibilities. Instead, it involves a subtle but profound shift in how we relate to our activities and relationships. We begin to sense the difference between effort that flows from alignment and effort that stems from resistance, between persistence that serves our deeper purpose and stubbornness that keeps us trapped in ineffective patterns. Take a moment now to reflect on these questions. When in your life have you experienced something like Siren, that sense of natural unfolding, of right action arising effortlessly from the circumstances themselves? Perhaps it was a conversation that flowed so smoothly you lost track of time, a project that seemed to complete itself through you rather than by you, a moment of parenting or friendship when exactly the right words emerged without planning or effort. What did those experiences feel like in your body? How did your breathing change? What was the quality of your thoughts during those moments? How did your relationship to time and outcome shift? These memories are not just pleasant recollections, they are glimpses of your natural state, previews of what becomes possible when we stop fighting the current of existence and learn to move with its deeper rhythms. Now consider this: what areas of your life currently feel characterized by struggle, force, or constant effort? Where do you find yourself pushing against circumstances rather than dancing with them? What would it mean to bring the same quality of natural flow you've experienced in those peak moments to these more challenging areas? Here is a practice you can begin immediately, something so simple it might seem almost too easy to be transformative. For the next 3 days, before taking any significant action, sending an important email, making a phone call, beginning a difficult conversation, pause for just 3 breaths. In the first breath, notice any tension or urgency in your body. In the second breath, soften around that tension without trying to eliminate it. In the third breath, sense what wants to emerge naturally from this moment of softening, and then act from that place rather than from the initial impulse. This practice begins to train what I call the Wu-Wei reflex, the capacity to find the path of least resistance that serves the highest good. It develops your sensitivity to the difference between action that flows from centeredness and action that springs from reactivity or compulsion. The ancient roots of this wisdom run deep, deeper than any individual tradition or cultural expression. They tap into something fundamental about the nature of reality itself, the fact that the universe operates through principles of organic unfolding rather than mechanical force, that evolution proceeds through cooperation as much as competition, that the most stable structures in nature are also the most flexible. As we prepare to explore how these timeless principles translate into the specific challenges of contemporary life, our work and relationships, our decisions and daily routines, I invite you to hold this foundation gently in your awareness. Not as dogma to be believed or rules to be followed, but as a living inquiry, a scientific experiment in the laboratory of your own experience. The Tao that Lao Tzu pointed toward is not a relic of ancient China but a present-moment reality as available to you right now as the breath in your lungs or the beating of your heart. It is the intelligence that grows your hair and heals your cuts, the force that draws migrating birds across continents and keeps planets in their orbits, the creative power that transforms seeds into forests and possibilities into realities. Learning to align with this intelligence, to cooperate with rather than control the forces that shape our lives, is perhaps the most practical skill we can develop in an age of increasing complexity and accelerating change. For when we stop exhausting ourselves swimming against the current, we discover that the current itself is carrying us toward destinations more beautiful than any we could have imagined through our own limited planning. This is the promise of Wu Wei, the gift of these ancient roots, not a life of passive drift, but one of engaged flow, not the abandonment of purpose, but the discovery of a purpose that serves something greater than our small sense of self, not the end of effort, but the transformation of effort into something as natural and sustainable as the turning of seasons or the rising of dawn. Dancing with daily life. The bamboo outside my window bends gracefully in this morning's wind, never breaking, never resisting. As I watch its elegant dance, I'm reminded of how we might move through our daily lives, not as rigid oak trees fighting every storm, but as flexible bamboo, strong precisely because we know when to yield. You wake each morning into a world that seems to demand constant pushing, endless doing, perpetual striving. Your phone buzzes with urgency, your calendar screams with obligations, and somewhere beneath it all, a quiet voice whispers, "There must be another way." Today, I want to show you that way, the path of dancing with life rather than wrestling it to the ground. The sacred art of divine timing. In the mountains where I once walked, I learned that water never rushes. It knows something we have forgotten. There is a sacred timing to all things, a rhythm that pulses through the universe like a cosmic heartbeat. The ancient Chinese called this kairos, not clock time, but soul time, the perfect moment when action becomes effortless and results flow naturally. I remember watching a master calligrapher in the markets of old China. He would sit before his rice paper for long minutes, brush poised but motionless, while impatient customers shuffled their feet. Then, in one fluid motion lasting mere seconds, he would create a character of breathtaking beauty. "The painting happens in the waiting," he told me, his eyes twinkling with ancient mischief. "The brush merely records what has already been completed in the realm of possibility." This is the first key to dancing with daily life, learning to recognize the difference between chronological time and opportune time. Your culture has trained you to believe that earlier is always better, that faster equals more successful, that delay means failure. But the Tao operates on a different schedule entirely. Consider how you approach your work projects. Do you force yourself to write when the words feel like stones in your mouth? Do you push for solutions when your mind feels cloudy and scattered? The way of Wu Wei invites you to notice these internal seasons, to honor the fallow periods that precede breakthrough, to trust that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is wait. I'm not suggesting laziness or procrastination. These are forms of resistance too, just in the opposite direction. True timing awareness feels different. It's the pregnant pause before exactly the right words emerge in a difficult conversation. It's the intuitive knowing that this morning is perfect for that important phone call you've been postponing. It's the recognition that your creative energy flows strongest at 3 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whenever your unique rhythm dictates. Reflection. When in your life have you experienced perfect timing, moments when everything flowed effortlessly because you acted at exactly the right moment? What did that feel like in your body? Reflection. Where in your current life are you pushing against natural timing? What projects, conversations, or decisions might benefit from a period of conscious waiting? Practice. For the next week, begin each day by asking, what wants to emerge today? Sit quietly for 5 minutes and feel into your energy, your enthusiasm, your natural inclinations. Let your daily priorities arise from this inner sensing rather than from external shoulds and have tos. Communication as emotional Aikido. The art of Aikido teaches us to blend with an attacker's energy rather than meeting force with force. In my years of observing human nature, I've discovered that this same principle transforms every form of communication, from marriage conflicts to business negotiations to casual conversations with strangers. Most people approach difficult conversations like warriors preparing for battle. They armor themselves with arguments, sharpen their points of view like weapons, and enter the interaction determined to win. But winning a conversation usually means the relationship loses something precious. The way of Wu Wei suggests a radically different approach. Picture yourself in a heated discussion with someone you care about. They're speaking with passion, perhaps anger, about something that matters deeply to them. Your habitual response might be to defend, to counter their points, to prove them wrong. Instead, imagine becoming like water encountering a rock. You don't shatter against their position, You flow around it, under it, finding the spaces where connection becomes possible. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or abandoning your own truth. Rather, it means developing the Aikido master's sensitivity, the ability to feel the underlying current beneath someone's words. Often, when people seem angry, they're actually afraid. When they appear demanding, they may be feeling helpless. When they sound critical, they might be crying out for understanding. I once witnessed a mother transform a teenager's rebellion through this principle. Instead of meeting her daughter's harsh words with equally harsh boundaries, she learned to hear the fear beneath the fury. "You sound really scared about something," she began saying during their conflicts. "Tell me what's frightening you." The daughter's defensiveness melted like snow in spring rain, and their relationship began healing from depths they hadn't accessed in years. In your workplace, notice how different it feels to respond rather than react. When a colleague criticizes your work, instead of immediately justifying your choices, you might first acknowledge their perspective. "I can see this approach concerns you. Help me understand what you're noticing." This simple shift from defensiveness to curiosity often reveals solutions neither of you could have discovered through argument. The secret lies in remembering that most human conflict stems from people feeling unheard, unseen, or misunderstood. When you offer the gift of genuine listening, not waiting for your turn to speak, but truly receiving what another person is trying to communicate, you create space for wisdom to emerge from between you. Reflection. Think of a recurring conflict in your life. What might be the deeper need or fear underneath the other person's challenging behavior? How might your response change if you addressed that underlying current instead of just the surface words? Practice. In your next 3 difficult conversations, experiment with this phrase, "Help me understand." Use it genuinely, with real curiosity about the other person's perspective. Notice how the energy of the interaction shifts when you become a student rather than a defendant. Leadership through presence. The most powerful leaders I've known throughout history shared one quality that had nothing to do with charisma, intelligence, or strategic thinking. They possessed a quality of presence that made others feel seen, valued, and inspired to become their best selves. This is leadership through Wu Wei, influence that flows from being rather than doing. Your culture teaches leadership as a set of techniques: how to motivate, how to delegate, how to make decisive choices. But true leadership emerges from a different source entirely. It arises when you become so grounded in your own authenticity, so clear about your values, so present to the moment that others naturally align with your energy. I remember a village leader from ancient times who rarely spoke in council meetings. When conflicts arose between families, he would listen to all sides with such complete attention that people began solving their own problems simply by speaking in his presence. His power wasn't in having the right answers, it was in creating space where right action could emerge naturally. This kind of leadership requires tremendous inner work. You must become intimately familiar with your own reactions, triggers, and unconscious patterns. When you're grounded in self-awareness, you stop projecting your fears onto others. When you're secure in your own worth, you don't need to control outcomes to feel valuable. When you trust the intelligence of life itself, you can allow solutions to emerge from the collective wisdom of your team. Consider how you currently try to influence others. Do you use persuasion, incentives, or pressure? Do you find yourself frustrated when people don't follow your vision? The Way of Wu Wei invites you to experiment with a different approach, becoming so clear about your own direction that others are naturally drawn to join you. This might look like a parent who stops trying to convince their child to clean their room and instead embodies the peaceful energy of an organized space. It might look like a manager who stops micromanaging and instead creates such clear intention and trust that team members begin exceeding expectations naturally. It might look like a spouse who stops trying to change their partner and instead focuses so completely on their own growth that the entire relationship transforms. The paradox of Wu Wei leadership is that you gain influence by releasing the need to control. You inspire others by becoming inspirational yourself. You create change by embodying the change you wish to see, trusting that authenticity is more contagious than any strategy. Reflection. Where in your life are you trying to lead through force, persuasion, or control? What would it look like to lead through presence and example instead? Reflection. think of someone whose presence naturally inspires you. What qualities do they embody? How might you cultivate those same qualities in yourself? Practice. Choose one relationship where you typically try to influence the other person's behavior. For 1 week, focus entirely on your own energy and actions in that relationship. Notice what shifts when you stop trying to change them and instead become the energy you wish to experience. Work as natural expression. The ancient Taoists understood something that our modern world has forgotten. Work is not separate from life, it is life expressing itself through our unique gifts and talents. When you align your daily labor with your natural talents and deeper purpose, work transforms from burden to blessing, from obligation to offering. I observe so many souls dragging themselves through careers that drain rather than energize, jobs that use only a fraction of their capabilities, work environments that contradict their deepest values. This disconnection between who you are and what you do creates a subtle but persistent suffering that colors everything else in your life. The path of Wu Wei suggests a radically different relationship with work. Instead of asking what job can I get, or what will pay the bills, you begin with deeper questions. What wants to express itself through me? What problems do I feel naturally called to solve? Where do my authentic talents meet the world's genuine needs? This isn't naive idealism, it's practical spirituality. When you're operating from your zone of natural genius, work doesn't feel like work. Time bends. Energy flows. Solutions emerge effortlessly because you're not fighting against your essential nature, you're dancing with it. I think of a woman I knew who spent 15 years in corporate finance, successful by every external measure but dying a little each day inside. She had always been drawn to healing, to working with children, but convinced herself these were impractical dreams. When she finally honored her calling and became a pediatric nurse, her entire life transformed. Not just her work satisfaction, but her relationships, her health, her sense of meaning and contribution. The transition wasn't without challenges, but they were the right challenges, difficulties that stretched her toward growth rather than obstacles that crushed her spirit. This is how you know you're moving in alignment with the Tao. Even the struggles feel meaningful, even the setbacks contain lessons that serve your larger unfolding. Perhaps you can't immediately quit your current job and follow your bliss. The way of Wu Wei is gradual, organic. You begin by bringing more of your authentic self to whatever work you're already doing. You notice which tasks energize you and which drain you. You pay attention to compliments you receive repeatedly. These often point toward natural talents you've learned to take for granted. You might start a side project that feeds your soul while maintaining financial stability. You might volunteer in areas that call to you, testing whether your dreams match reality. You might simply begin each workday by asking, how can I serve today? How can I bring my best self to these tasks? Reflection. If money weren't a consideration, what kind of work would you naturally gravitate toward? What does this reveal about your authentic calling? Reflection. In your current work situation, which activities energize you and which drain you? What patterns do you notice? Practice. For the next 2 weeks, approach your current work as a spiritual practice. Before beginning each task, take a breath and ask, how can I bring presence and excellence to this moment? Notice how the quality of your experience shifts when you approach even mundane tasks with full attention. Relationships in flow. The deepest teaching of the Tao reveals itself most clearly in how we relate to one another. Relationships are the crucible where all our spiritual concepts either prove themselves or crumble into mere philosophy. Here, in the tender space between human hearts, we discover whether we truly understand the dance of Wu Wei or whether we're still trying to choreograph the steps. Most relationships suffer from the same fundamental misunderstanding that plagues every other area of life, the belief that love means control, that caring requires fixing, that commitment demands conformity. But love, in its truest expression, is the ultimate act of Wu Wei, allowing another being to unfold according to their own nature while offering the gift of your authentic presence. I observe couples who spend decades trying to reshape each other, parents who exhaust themselves attempting to force their children into predetermined molds, friends who manipulate rather than appreciate. This approach creates exactly the opposite of what they're seeking. The more you grasp at love, the more it slips through your fingers like sand. The way of flow in relationships requires tremendous courage because it asks you to love without guarantee, to remain open without control, to commit to growth rather than to static comfort. It means accepting your beloved exactly as they are today while holding space for who they might become tomorrow, without attachment to any particular outcome. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful behavior. True acceptance is highly intelligent. It distinguishes between what can be changed and what cannot, between healthy boundaries and controlling manipulation, between supporting growth and forcing change. I remember a couple on the verge of divorce who discovered this principle just in time. The husband had spent years trying to make his wife more social, more organized, more similar to him. The wife had campaigned equally hard to make him more spontaneous, more emotionally expressive, more like her vision of the perfect partner. Both were exhausted from the effort and resentful from the failure. Their breakthrough came when they began practicing what I call loving what is. Instead of focusing on changing each other, they became curious about appreciating each other. He began noticing the beauty of her introspective nature, the depth that came from her natural tendency toward solitude. She began appreciating his steady presence, the security that flowed from his consistent routines. This shift from improvement to appreciation transformed not only their relationship but each of them individually. When he stopped pressuring her to be more social, she naturally began reaching out to friends more often, because she wanted to, not because she felt she should. When she stopped criticizing his routines, he began experimenting with spontaneity, from a place of confidence rather than defensiveness. The secret is understanding that people change not when they feel they must, but when they feel they can. When you create space for someone to be exactly who they are, you paradoxically create the safety necessary for natural growth and evolution. Reflection: in your closest relationships, where are you trying to change or fix the other person? What would it feel like to love them exactly as they are today? Reflection: where do you feel pressure to be different than you naturally are in order to maintain someone's love? What would it feel like to be completely authentic in that relationship? Practice: choose one important relationship in your life. For the next week, practice appreciating rather than improving. Notice qualities you usually take for granted. Express gratitude for who they are rather than suggestions for who they might become. Observe how this shift affects the energy between you. Intuitive decision-making. In a world obsessed with data, analysis, and logical reasoning, I want to remind you of an older, deeper form of intelligence that exists within your very body. This is the wisdom that helps birds navigate thousands of miles without GPS, that tells trees when to release their leaves, that guides mothers to comfort crying children in ways no manual could teach. You possess this same intelligence, though your culture has trained you to distrust it in favor of purely mental analysis. The way of Wu Wei involves learning to dance between these two forms of knowing, honoring both your thinking mind and your feeling body, allowing decisions to emerge from their collaboration rather than from the tyranny of overthinking. Every choice you make sends ripples through the fabric of your life. The decisions that feel most aligned, that create the most beneficial long-term consequences, rarely emerge from mental analysis alone. They arise from a deeper place where your values, your intuition, your life experience, and your rational mind work together in seamless cooperation. I observe people torturing themselves over decisions that their bodies have already made. They create endless pros and cons lists for relationships they know in their hearts aren't right. They research careers exhaustively while ignoring the subtle excitement they feel when certain possibilities arise naturally in conversation. The art of intuitive decision-making doesn't mean abandoning rational thought, it means expanding your definition of intelligence to include the sophisticated guidance system that operates below conscious awareness. This system processes far more information than your thinking mind ever could, taking into account subtle patterns, past experiences, future implications, and present-moment wisdom in ways that feel almost magical. Learning to access this deeper knowing requires developing what I call somatic sensitivity, the ability to feel how different choices land in your body before you make them. When you imagine saying yes to an opportunity, does your body feel expansive or contracted? When you picture ending a relationship, do you feel relief or dread? When you consider a major life change, does your breathing become deeper or more shallow? These physical responses contain tremendous intelligence, but they require quiet attention to perceive. In a noisy world full of external pressures and conflicting advice, you must create space for your own inner wisdom to be heard. The most skillful decision-makers I've known follow a simple process. They gather relevant information, consider the logical implications, and then sit quietly with the choice until they feel a clear internal response. They understand that some decisions need to ripen like fruit on a tree. Forcing premature choice often leads to premature regret. Reflection. Think of a recent decision that turned out particularly well. How much did logic contribute to that choice, and how much came from intuition or gut feeling? Reflection. What decision are you currently facing? When you imagine each possible option, what do you notice in your body? What feels expansive versus contracted? Practice. For the next week, before making any significant choice, from what to eat for lunch to how to respond to a challenging email, pause and feel the options in your body. Notice the subtle physical sensations that accompany different possibilities. Let your body vote before your mind decides. The art of receiving. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Wu Wei for people raised in an achievement-oriented culture is learning the forgotten art of receiving. You've been trained to believe that worth comes from giving, producing, achieving, earning. But the Tao flows in cycles of receiving and offering, inhaling and exhaling, gathering and releasing. When you chronically overgive without allowing yourself to receive, you create an imbalance that eventually leads to resentment, exhaustion, and spiritual emptiness. When you struggle to accept help, compliments, gifts, or opportunities, you block the natural circulation of energy that wants to flow through your life. I watch people who can give love beautifully but have tremendous difficulty accepting it when it's offered. I see individuals who are generous with their time and resources but feel guilty or uncomfortable when others want to reciprocate. This one-way generosity isn't actually generous at all. It's often a subtle form of control, a way of staying safe by remaining the giver rather than risking the vulnerability of receiving. True receiving is an act of courage. It requires admitting that you don't have everything handled, that you can benefit from support, that you're worthy of care simply because you exist. It means opening your hands and heart to possibilities you didn't create, couldn't control, and perhaps don't feel you deserve. The universe has a natural tendency toward generosity. Opportunities want to find you. Love wants to reach you. Abundance wants to flow through your life. But these gifts require your participation, not just your effort, but your openness. I remember a man who prayed desperately for financial relief while simultaneously refusing help from friends, rejecting job offers that seemed too good to be true, and dismissing unexpected opportunities as lucky breaks that happen to other people. His closed-handed relationship with receiving created artificial scarcity in a life that could have been abundant. Learning to receive gracefully transforms not only your own experience but also the joy others feel in giving to you. When you accept a compliment with simple thank you instead of deflecting it, you allow the giver to feel the satisfaction of appreciation. When you let friends help you move house instead of insisting you can handle it alone, you create bonds of mutual support that strengthen over time. The art of receiving also means staying open to how your prayers might be answered, how your dreams might unfold, how solutions might arrive. Often, we have such specific expectations about how good things should come to us that we miss the actual gifts life is offering. Reflection. In what areas of your life do you have difficulty receiving, whether it's help, compliments, opportunities, or love? What fears or beliefs might be blocking your ability to accept these gifts? Reflection. When someone offers you something, assistance, appreciation, or affection, what is your automatic response? Do you deflect, minimize, or immediately try to reciprocate? Practice. For the next week, practice receiving gracefully in small ways. Accept compliments with a simple thank you. Allow someone to buy you coffee without immediately offering to pay next time. Ask for help with something you usually handle alone. Notice what emotions arise and practice breathing through any discomfort. As twilight approaches and I prepare to close this chapter, I'm reminded of something the ancient river told me long ago. The secret to dancing with life is remembering that you are both the dancer and the dance, both the river and the banks that guide its flow. Tomorrow, we'll explore simple practices that can transform these principles from beautiful concepts into lived reality. But for now, rest in the knowing that you already possess everything you need to begin dancing with your daily life rather than wrestling it into submission. The bamboo outside my window is settled into evening stillness, but even in rest, it remains ready to dance with whatever wind may come. This is the way of Wu Wei, prepared but not tense, open but not empty, responsive but not reactive. Your life is waiting to be lived with this same graceful readiness. Simple rituals for an inner revolution. There is something profound that happens when we stop seeking dramatic transformation and instead tend to the small, quiet moments of our days. I have watched the seasons change countless times, and each spring teaches me the same truth: the most powerful revolutions begin not with grand gestures, but with the gentle persistence of a seed pushing through dark soil, 1 millimeter at a time. In our culture of instant gratification and sweeping life makeovers, we often overlook the revolutionary potential of simple, daily practices. Yet it is precisely in these modest rituals, as humble as morning breath, as ordinary as walking to the mailbox, that the deepest transformations take root. The ancient masters understood this. They knew that Wu Wei is not a philosophy to be studied, but a way of being to be lived, breath by breath, step by step. When I speak of simple rituals, I am not offering you another productivity system or self-improvement regimen. I am sharing pathways back to your natural state, gentle practices that help you remember what you already know in your bones. These are not tasks to accomplish, but invitations to come home to yourself. Think of a river wearing away stone. The water doesn't strain or struggle, it simply flows, day after day, year after year, until the hardest granite yields to its patient caress. Your daily practices work in much the same way, softening the rigid patterns that keep you swimming against life's current, gradually returning you to the effortless flow that is your birthright. The observer's meditation, becoming the witness. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day, there exists a perfect stillness that lives within you always. This is the place of the observer, the part of you that can watch thoughts come and go like clouds across an empty sky, without being carried away by their drama or urgency. I often begin my days by sitting in the stillness, not to achieve anything or get anywhere, but simply to remember who I am beneath all the doing and becoming. The practice is beautifully simple. I close my eyes and notice what is already here. The sensation of breathing, the sounds filtering through the window, the play of light behind my eyelids. I don't try to change anything or make anything happen. I simply witness whatever arises with the gentle curiosity of a child watching butterflies in a garden. This is not the meditation of forcing the mind to be quiet. Such effort only creates more turbulence. Instead, it is the art of watching the mind's natural movement without getting swept away by its stories. Thoughts will come, as they always do. Emotions will surge and subside, as they must. The practice is not to stop this natural flow, but to recognize yourself as the still center around which all experience revolves. When I first learned this practice, my teacher told me something that changed everything. "You are not the waves," she said, her eyes twinkling with ancient mischief. "You are the ocean itself. Waves may rise and fall on your surface, but your depths remain forever calm." This image stayed with me through countless mornings of sitting, reminding me that peace is not something I need to create, but something I am. As days turn into weeks of this gentle witnessing, something remarkable begins to happen. The urgent voice in your head that constantly narrates and judges starts to lose its grip on your attention. You begin to experience moments, first brief, then longer, where you act from a place of deep knowing rather than mental chatter. Decisions become clearer, not because you think harder about them, but because you learn to listen to the wisdom that emerges from stillness. The observer meditation teaches us perhaps the most essential skill of Wu Wei, the ability to respond rather than react. When we identify completely with our thoughts and emotions, we become like a leaf blown by every passing wind. But when we remember ourselves as the witness, we gain the space to choose our response from a place of centered awareness. This practice asks nothing of you but your presence. There is no right way to do it, no achievement to unlock, no spiritual state to attain. You simply sit, breathe, and watch the dance of life unfold within and around you. Some days the mind will be busy as a marketplace, other days it will be still as a mountain lake. Both are perfect, Both are part of the natural rhythm of consciousness learning to know itself. Take a moment now to consider, when was the last time you truly witnessed your inner experience without trying to fix, change, or improve anything? Can you feel the relief that comes from simply being present with what is, exactly as it is? Begin tomorrow morning with just 5 minutes of this gentle watching. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and invite yourself to notice whatever is present without judgment. If your mind wanders, and it will, simply notice that too, with the same kind curiosity you might have for a bird landing on your windowsill. Breath as anchor, the wisdom of natural rhythm. There is one teacher who has been with you since your first moment on this earth and will remain until your last, your breath. In a world that constantly pulls us into past regrets and future anxieties, the breath offers a reliable pathway back to the present moment, to the only place where life actually happens. I have noticed that modern life has taught many of us to breathe as if we were constantly preparing for crisis, shallow, rapid breaths that keep us perpetually on edge. This is not the breathing of our ancestors, who lived in rhythm with seasons and cycles, whose bodies knew the deep satisfaction of full, natural breath. When we learn to breathe as nature intended, we begin to live as nature intended, with trust, presence, and an innate sense of timing. The breath holds ancient wisdom about the art of receiving and releasing, the fundamental rhythm that governs all of life. Every inhalation is an act of trust, opening ourselves to receive what life offers. Every exhalation is an act of faith, releasing what we no longer need. In this simple cycle, repeated thousands of times each day, we find a perfect metaphor for Wu Wei, the art of receiving what comes and releasing what goes, without grasping or pushing away. When I teach breath practices, I often begin by inviting people to simply notice how they are already breathing, without trying to change anything. This awareness itself is transformative. Most of us have never truly observed our breath, we've taken it for granted like the beating of our hearts or the blinking of our eyes. But when we begin to pay attention, we discover that the breath is constantly responding to our thoughts, emotions, and environment. It is a living bridge between our inner experience and the world around us. There is one particular breathing practice that has served me well through decades of both tranquil and turbulent times. I call it the breath of returning, and it works with the body's natural wisdom rather than imposing artificial patterns upon it. You simply breathe in for a count of 4, hold gently for 4, breathe out for 6, and pause for 2. The slightly longer exhale activates your body's natural relaxation response, while the brief pause at the end creates space for stillness to deepen. But beyond technique lies something more precious, learning to trust your breath as a guide for living. When faced with difficult decisions or challenging emotions, I often pause and take 3 conscious breaths before responding. This simple act creates space between stimulus and response, allowing wisdom to emerge from the pause between thoughts. It is remarkable how often the right words, the appropriate action, or the necessary clarity arises in that small space of conscious breathing. Your breath also serves as a barometer for how aligned you are with the natural flow of life. When you notice your breathing becoming shallow or constricted, it often signals that you are fighting against what is, trying to control something beyond your influence, or holding tension that no longer serves you. The breath, in its honest simplicity, never lies about your state of being. I remember walking through a bamboo grove during a windstorm, watching how the tall stalks bent and swayed without breaking. Their secret was not rigidity but flexibility, not resistance but responsiveness. Your breath teaches the same lesson. When life brings unexpected pressure, learn to bend with it rather than brace against it. Breathe into the difficulty, allowing it space to move through you rather than getting stuck within you. The morning breath practice I cherish most is also the simplest. Upon waking, before the mind begins its daily agenda, I place one hand on my heart and one on my belly, and breathe deeply for just 1 minute. This brief ritual connects me with the rhythms of my body and sets an intention to move through the day with greater awareness and gentleness. Consider how your breath changes throughout the day. Do you breathe differently when you're rushing versus when you're relaxed? How does your breathing shift when you're listening deeply to someone you love? What would it feel like to carry the breath of deep listening throughout your entire day? Practice breathing consciously for just 2 minutes each morning, using the simple rhythm I described or simply following your body's natural wisdom. Notice how this small act of attention ripples out into the rest of your day, creating moments of spontaneous pause and presence. Walking as meditation, movement with presence. There is something our ancestors understood that we have largely forgotten in our rush toward destinations. Walking itself can be a profound spiritual practice, a moving meditation that connects us intimately with the earth beneath our feet and the rhythm of our own being. Every step offers an opportunity to arrive more fully in the present moment, to feel the miracle of balance and forward movement that we so often take for granted. In my daily walks, I have discovered that the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other, when done with awareness, becomes a gateway to presence more reliable than any seated meditation. The rhythmic movement naturally settles the mind, while the changing scenery provides just enough stimulation to keep us from getting lost in mental loops. Walking meditation teaches us that we don't need to sit still to find stillness. Sometimes we must move to discover the peace that moves with us. I often begin my contemplative walks with an intention not to get anywhere in particular, but to be fully present with each step. This shift from destination-focused walking to presence-focused walking changes everything. Instead of rushing past the world in our hurry to arrive somewhere else, we begin to notice the incredible aliveness that surrounds us always. The way light filters through leaves, the conversation of birds, the feeling of air against our skin, the subtle variations in the ground beneath our feet. There is a particular way of walking that I learned from watching cats. They place each paw with complete attention, fully committing to each step before taking the next. When we walk in this way, with full presence and commitment to each step, we naturally align with the principle of Wu Wei. We move forward not by pushing or striving, but by allowing our natural rhythm to carry us, trusting in the simple mechanics of balance and momentum. The practice I find most transformative is what I call walking with the earth. Instead of walking on top of the ground, I imagine walking with it, as if my feet and the earth are collaborating in each step. This subtle shift in awareness creates a sense of partnership with the natural world, reminding me that I am not separate from the environment I move through, but intimately connected with it. During difficult periods in my life, walking has often provided the clarity that sitting still could not offer. There is something about the gentle, repetitive movement that helps process emotions and insights in a way that purely mental effort cannot achieve. The rhythm of walking seems to match the rhythm of thoughts finding their natural order, solutions emerging not through forced analysis but through the simple act of moving forward with trust and patience. I have learned to walk differently in different circumstances. When my mind is agitated, I walk slowly and deliberately, allowing each step to anchor me in the present. When I feel stuck or lethargic, I walk with slightly more energy, allowing the movement to awaken dormant vitality. When I need to make an important decision, I walk without any agenda except to remain open and receptive, trusting that the right insight will arise when the time is right. The beauty of walking meditation is its complete accessibility. You can practice it anywhere, at any pace, for any duration. A mindful walk to the mailbox can be as spiritually nourishing as an hours-long hike in nature. The key is not the distance covered or the beauty of the surroundings, but the quality of presence you bring to the simple act of moving through space. One of my favorite practices is to dedicate the first 5 minutes of any walk to conscious gratitude, appreciating the miracle of legs that carry me, lungs that breathe, eyes that see, and the countless unseen processes that make each step possible. This gratitude naturally opens the heart and creates a foundation of appreciation for whatever else the walk might offer. Urban walking offers its own gifts when approached with presence. The sounds of the city become a symphony rather than noise, the faces of passing strangers become opportunities for silent blessing, the architecture becomes a testament to human creativity and collaboration. Even walking through challenging environments can become a practice of maintaining inner equilibrium while moving through external chaos. Reflect on your relationship with walking. Do you typically walk to get somewhere, or do you ever walk simply to be present with the act of walking? How might your daily experience shift if you treated even mundane walks as opportunities for meditation and connection? Begin incorporating 5 minutes of conscious walking into your routine, perhaps while walking to your car, around your neighborhood, or even within your home. Focus simply on the sensation of your feet touching the ground and the rhythm of your movement through space. Automatic morning writing, releasing mental turbulence. In the tender space between sleeping and full waking, before the day's responsibilities claim our attention, there exists a golden opportunity to empty the mind of its accumulated thoughts and worries, creating space for clarity and inspiration to emerge naturally. This is the gift of morning writing, a practice of allowing thoughts to flow onto paper without censorship, judgment, or particular purpose. I discovered this practice during a period when my mind felt like a jar of muddy water, constantly stirred up by worries and mental chatter. No amount of thinking seemed to bring clarity. Instead, my thoughts seemed to multiply like ripples on a disturbed pond. It was then that a friend suggested I simply write down whatever was in my mind, without concern for grammar, brilliance, or even coherence. "Just let it pour out," she said, like emptying a full cup to make room for fresh tea. The practice is almost absurdly simple. Upon waking, before checking messages or beginning the day's activities, you sit with pen and paper and write continuously for a set period, usually 15 to 20 minutes. You write whatever comes to mind, without stopping to edit, correct, or even think about what you're writing. The goal is not to produce anything meaningful, but to create a channel for the mind's natural tendency to discharge its overnight accumulation of thoughts, dreams, worries, and random observations. What emerges on the page is often surprising. Mixed in with mundane concerns about errands and appointments, you might find unexpected insights about relationships, creative solutions to problems you didn't even know you were working on, or clarity about decisions that have been troubling you. It's as if the act of moving thoughts from mind to paper creates space for deeper wisdom to surface, like sediment settling in still water to reveal the clear depths beneath. I think of this practice as composting for the mind. Just as gardeners know that decomposing organic matter becomes rich soil for new growth, the apparent waste of random thoughts and mental debris, when allowed to flow freely onto paper, creates conditions for fresh insights and creative ideas to take root. The key is not to judge what emerges, but to trust the process of mental clearing and renewal. Some mornings, my writing feels like a rushing river, thoughts pouring out faster than my hand can move. Other mornings, it feels more like trying to squeeze water from a stone, each sentence requiring effort to extract. Both experiences are perfect and necessary. The river days clear accumulated mental energy, the desert days teach patience and help me connect with subtler inner movements that might otherwise go unnoticed. One of the most valuable aspects of this practice is how it reveals the repetitive patterns of mental preoccupation that usually operate below conscious awareness. When you see the same worry appearing on the page day after day, you begin to recognize it as a mental habit rather than a legitimate concern requiring constant attention. This recognition itself often dissolves the worry's power over your attention, freeing up mental energy for more creative and productive uses. Morning writing also serves as a bridge between the non-linear, intuitive consciousness of sleep and the more structured, goal-oriented consciousness required for daily activities. Instead of jarring yourself awake with immediate productivity demands, you create a gentle transition that honors both the wisdom of the unconscious mind and the practical needs of waking life. I have found that this practice naturally develops into a dialogue with a deeper part of myself. Often, after emptying out the surface concerns and mental noise, a quieter voice begins to emerge on the page, sometimes offering comfort during difficult times, sometimes providing perspective on challenges I'm facing, sometimes simply expressing gratitude or wonder at the simple fact of being alive. The physical act of handwriting adds an important dimension to this practice that typing cannot replicate. There is something about the rhythm of pen on paper, the slight resistance of the writing instrument, the visual flow of words appearing in your own handwriting, that creates a more intimate connection between thought and expression. It slows down the process just enough to allow space for depth and reflection to emerge. Over time, these morning pages become a record of your inner journey, though I recommend reading them only occasionally, if at all. The value lies not in creating a document to be preserved, but in the daily practice of mental clearing and authentic expression. Some practitioners choose to burn their pages periodically, treating the practice as an offering to the transformative power of release. Notice how your mind feels first thing in the morning. Is it immediately busy with plans and concerns, or do you experience moments of clarity and spaciousness? How might creating a routine of mental clearing affect your ability to approach the day with presence and creativity? Set aside 15 minutes tomorrow morning to write continuously about whatever is present in your mind, without concern for quality or meaning. Allow yourself to discover what wants to be expressed when given free rein to flow onto paper without judgment. Conscious pause, micro moments of recalibration. Throughout each day, life offers us countless opportunities to pause, breathe, and realign with the present moment, transitions between activities, moments of waiting, instances when we notice tension or hurry beginning to build. These brief interludes, when met with consciousness rather than filled with distraction, become powerful gateways back to centeredness and clarity. I have learned to think of these pauses as tuning forks for the soul. Just as a musician periodically checks their instrument against a standard pitch to ensure harmony, we can use brief moments throughout the day to recalibrate our inner state, returning to the natural rhythm and balance that get disrupted by the inevitable demands and pressures of daily life. The conscious pause is not about stopping your life or withdrawing from activity, it's about creating tiny islands of presence within the flow of your day. These might last only a few seconds or a minute at most, but their cumulative effect is profound. Like drops of water eventually filling a vessel, these moments of conscious presence gradually transform the overall quality of your daily experience. I often pause at thresholds, doorways, traffic lights, the moment before answering the phone or opening my computer. These natural transition points are already built into the rhythm of daily life, we simply need to remember to use them consciously. Instead of rushing through these moments in anticipation of what comes next, we can inhabit them fully, using them as opportunities to arrive more completely in the present moment. One of my favorite pause practices happens while waiting, for elevators, in line at the store, for websites to load, for someone who is running late. Our culture has trained us to experience waiting as wasted time, something to be filled with phone scrolling or mental planning. But what if we treated these moments as gifts, opportunities to simply be present without any agenda except awareness itself? During these brief pauses, I often place one hand on my heart and take 3 conscious breaths, feeling the simple miracle of being alive, of having a body that breathes itself, of being part of the vast web of life that continues its ancient dance all around me. This simple gesture creates an instant connection with gratitude and wonder, shifting my internal state from hurry and tension to presence and appreciation. The pause can also serve as a pattern interrupt when we notice ourselves getting caught in habitual reactions. That moment when you feel anger beginning to rise, when anxiety starts to spiral, when you catch yourself rushing towards some imagined deadline, these are perfect opportunities to pause, even if only for a single conscious breath, and choose your response from a centered place rather than reacting from unconscious habit. I have discovered that pausing before speaking often transforms the quality of my communication entirely. In that brief moment of silence, reactive words have a chance to settle, and whatever wants to be expressed from a deeper place can emerge. This practice has prevented countless misunderstandings and has often allowed conversations to unfold with greater wisdom and compassion than would have been possible without that small space of conscious consideration. Technology offers abundant opportunities for conscious pausing, if we choose to use it that way. Each time your phone rings, you can let it ring once while you take a breath and set an intention for the conversation. When you sit down at your computer, you can pause for a moment to consider how you want to engage with whatever work awaits you. These tiny rituals help prevent the unconscious rushing that often characterizes our relationship with digital tools. The beauty of the conscious pause is that it requires no special training, equipment, or circumstances. It can be practiced anywhere, at any time, in any situation. Whether you're in a business meeting or changing a diaper, stuck in traffic or cooking dinner, there are always micro-opportunities to pause and reconnect with presence. Some of my most transformative insights have emerged not during formal meditation or contemplative practices, but during these brief interludes of conscious pausing throughout ordinary days. It's as if the slight space we create allows wisdom that has been waiting in the background to step forward and make itself known. The practice naturally develops its own intelligence over time. You begin to notice when you most need these moments of recalibration, perhaps when you're moving too fast, thinking too much, or feeling disconnected from your body and surroundings. The pause becomes a natural response to the body's wisdom, a way of honoring the need for brief rest and realignment that arise organically throughout each day. Pay attention to the natural transition moments in your day. How do you typically navigate doorways, waiting periods, or the spaces between activities? What would it feel like to treat these moments as opportunities for presence rather than obstacles to productivity? Choose 3 regular activities in your day, perhaps drinking your morning coffee, washing your hands, or sitting down in your car, and commit to pausing for just one conscious breath before beginning each activity. Gratitude as a natural state. True gratitude is not a practice we must remember to do, but a natural response that emerges when we see clearly the infinite gifts that surround us in every moment. It is the heart's spontaneous recognition of the miracle that we are alive, that we are part of this vast, interconnected web of existence, that we have been given the extraordinary opportunity to experience life through these particular eyes, in this particular time and place. In our culture, gratitude has often been reduced to a mental exercise, listing things we should feel thankful for, as if appreciation were a debt to be paid or a positive attitude to be maintained. But the gratitude I speak of is something altogether different. It is the natural flowering of awareness when we truly see what is already here, what has always been here, waiting for our attention and recognition. When I walk in the early morning and watch the sun rise over the mountains, gratitude is not something I have to generate. It arises spontaneously from simply witnessing the daily miracle of light returning to the world. When I taste simple food and really pay attention to the flavors, textures, and nourishment it provides, appreciation emerges naturally from the act of conscious receiving. When I look into the eyes of someone I love and see the mystery of another conscious being choosing to share this brief journey with me, my heart opens without effort or intention. This organic gratitude transforms our entire relationship with life. Instead of focusing on what we lack or what we hope to gain, we begin to see the overwhelming abundance that already exists in each moment. The breath moving through our bodies, the ground supporting our weight, the light allowing us to see, the sounds connecting us to the world around us, these simple facts of existence, when truly appreciated, reveal themselves as precious beyond measure. I have noticed that gratitude operates according to a beautiful paradox. The more we appreciate what we already have, the more life seems to offer us reasons for appreciation. This is not magical thinking, but a natural result of shifting our attention from scarcity to abundance, from what is missing to what is present. When we learn to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, life responds by revealing more of its hidden gifts. Gratitude also serves as a powerful antidote to the mind's tendency toward complaint and dissatisfaction. When we find ourselves caught in cycles of criticism, of ourselves, others, or circumstances, a moment of conscious appreciation can shift the entire quality of our inner experience. This shift happens not through denying legitimate concerns, but through expanding our perspective to include the larger context of gifts and blessings that surround even difficult situations. One practice I cherish is what I call appreciation of the invisible support. Throughout each day, countless people contribute to our well-being in ways we rarely acknowledge: the farmers who grew our food, the drivers who transport goods, the people who maintain the infrastructure we depend on, the ancestors whose struggles and wisdom created the conditions for our current opportunities. When we pause to recognize this vast network of interdependence, gratitude becomes a recognition of our place in the human family. The gratitude I speak of also extends to the challenges and difficulties that life presents, though this understanding often develops gradually over time. As we mature in our practice of appreciation, we begin to see how obstacles often redirect us toward greater alignment, how losses create space for new growth, how even painful experiences can become teachers and sources of deeper compassion. This is not about pretending difficulties are pleasant, but about recognizing the wisdom that often emerges from life's complete curriculum of joy and sorrow. Gratitude for the body becomes particularly transformative in a culture that constantly encourages dissatisfaction with our physical form. When we truly appreciate the miraculous complexity and intelligence of our bodies, the heart that beats without our conscious direction, the immune system that protects us from countless threats, the senses that allow us to experience beauty and pleasure, we naturally begin to treat our physical form with greater respect and kindness. I have found that expressing appreciation directly to people in my life, rather than just feeling grateful silently, deepens relationships in remarkable ways. When we tell someone specifically what we value about them or how they have contributed to our well-being, we strengthen the bonds of connection and often give them a gift they carry for years. Gratitude expressed becomes a form of generosity that enriches both giver and receiver. The practice of appreciation also naturally leads to what I call gratitude for potential, recognizing not only what is already manifested in our lives, but also the infinite possibilities that exist in each moment. Every new day contains the potential for learning, growth, connection, creativity, and service. When we appreciate this open-endedness, life becomes an adventure rather than a burden. Notice what naturally evokes appreciation in your daily experience. Is it beauty, kindness, simple pleasures, or something else entirely? How does your inner state shift when you pause to really acknowledge these gifts instead of rushing past them? Before sleep each night, spend a few minutes allowing your attention to rest on 3 things that supported or nourished you during the day, noticing how appreciation feels in your body when you give it space to fully emerge. The art of daily release. Perhaps the most essential skill for living in harmony with life's natural rhythm is learning to release, to let go of the thoughts, emotions, expectations, and attachments that accumulate throughout each day like dust on furniture. This releasing is not a violent pushing away, but a gentle opening of our grip, allowing what no longer serves us to flow naturally back into the larger stream of life. Throughout each day, we unconsciously collect mental and emotional residue from our interactions, decisions, and experiences. We hold on to conversations that ended hours ago, replay scenarios we wish had unfolded differently, carry tension from one activity into the next. Without conscious release, this accumulation creates a kind of energetic static that clouds our perception and diminishes our capacity for fresh response to whatever the present moment offers. The practice of daily release recognizes that holding on, whether to successes or failures, pleasant or unpleasant experiences, requires constant energy expenditure that could be better used for creative engagement with what is actually happening now. Like a river that would eventually stagnate if it tried to hold on to the water passing through it, we maintain our vitality and clarity by allowing experiences to flow through us rather than collecting inside us. I often think of this practice as an evening shower for consciousness, a time to wash away the accumulated psychic residue of the day, returning to the natural clarity and openness that allows us to meet tomorrow with fresh eyes and an unburdened heart. Just as we wouldn't consider sleeping in clothes worn throughout a busy day, we can learn to release the mental and emotional clothing we've accumulated through daily activities. One powerful method of release involves simply reviewing the day with conscious appreciation and then actively releasing any lingering attachments or concerns. I often do this while lying in bed before sleep, mentally visiting the day's significant moments, not to analyze or judge them, but to thank them for whatever they offered and then consciously let them go. This practice often reveals how much energy we waste holding on to experiences that have already passed, trying to change what can no longer be changed. Physical release practices can support this mental and emotional letting go. Gentle stretching, conscious breathing, or even symbolic gestures like washing hands while setting an intention to release the day can help the body participate in the process of renewal. The body has its own wisdom about release. Every exhalation is a letting go, every night of sleep a surrender to unconsciousness that allows restoration to occur naturally. Forgiveness becomes a crucial element of daily release, though not the heavy, effortful forgiveness often taught, but a simple recognition that holding on to resentment or self-criticism only perpetuates suffering without changing the past. This forgiveness is less about excusing harmful behavior than about refusing to carry the weight of past hurts into present moments that deserve our full attention and engagement. I have learned to release expectations as faithfully as I release grudges, recognizing that attachment to specific outcomes often prevents us from seeing the gifts that actually arrive. When we grip tightly to our ideas about how things should unfold, we miss opportunities that come in different packages than we anticipated. Daily release of expectations allows us to remain open to life's creative surprises. The practice extends to releasing identities and roles that may have served us during particular interactions but that we don't need to carry forward indefinitely. Perhaps you were the expert in one conversation, the student in another, the helper in a third situation. Rather than accumulating these roles into a heavy sense of fixed identity, you can appreciate each role for its temporary usefulness and then return to the spacious awareness that can play any role without being trapped by it. Releasing control is perhaps the most challenging and liberating aspect of this practice. Throughout each day, we often exhaust ourselves trying to manage outcomes, influence other people's responses, or ensure that complex situations unfold according to our preferences. The daily practice of release includes acknowledging what is genuinely within our influence and consciously letting go of our attempts to control what lies beyond our actual power. This doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible, but rather focusing our energy where it can actually make a difference while releasing the tension that comes from trying to manage unmanageable variables. Like a skilled sailor who adjusts the sails but doesn't try to control the wind, we learn to work skillfully with conditions while releasing attachment to results. I often end my release practice with a simple ritual, placing both hands on my heart and consciously offering the day's experiences, both pleasant and difficult, back to the larger intelligence that orchestrates life's unfolding. This gesture of surrender often brings immediate relief, as if setting down a heavy bag I didn't realize I was carrying. The art of release naturally deepens over time as we discover again and again that letting go doesn't diminish our lives but enriches them, creating space for new experiences, insights, and connections to emerge. What initially feels like loss gradually reveals itself as renewal, like pruning that allows plants to grow more vibrantly. Observe what you typically carry forward from one day to the next: unfinished conversations, concerns about future events, regrets about past decisions. How much energy goes into maintaining these mental holdings rather than engaging fully with present opportunities? Create a simple evening ritual of conscious release, perhaps while washing your face or changing clothes, where you set an intention to let go of the day's accumulations and return to the natural clarity that allows for rest and renewal. These simple practices, witnessing without judgment, breathing with awareness, walking with presence, writing without censorship, pausing with consciousness, appreciating what is already here, and releasing what no longer serves, form the foundation of a life lived in greater harmony with natural rhythms and deeper wisdom. They ask nothing extraordinary of you, require no special talents or circumstances, and can be woven seamlessly into the fabric of even the busiest daily routine. Yet their cumulative effect is quietly revolutionary, gradually transforming not only how you experience each day but how you understand your place in the larger tapestry of existence. These practices work not through force or dramatic effort, but through the same patient persistence that allows water to carve canyons and seeds to crack concrete. They invite you to remember what you already know in your deepest being, that you are part of an intelligent, benevolent universe that supports your highest flourishing when you learn to move in harmony with its natural rhythms rather than opposition to them. Begin gently, choose one practice that resonates with your heart, and trust the process of gradual transformation that unfolds when we align our daily habits with the wisdom that has guided conscious beings for thousands of years. The revolution you seek is not somewhere else, waiting for ideal conditions or perfect understanding. It is here, available in this moment, in the simple choice to bring consciousness to whatever you are already doing. Stories of transformation and ancient wisdom. I want to share with you some stories, tales that have found their way to me like leaves carried on the wind, settling quietly in the spaces where wisdom gathers. These are not mere anecdotes, but living teachings that reveal how the ancient way of Wu Wei unfolds in the texture of modern life. Each story carries within it the fragrance of transformation, the quiet revolution that happens when we stop fighting the river and learn to dance with its current. Some of these stories emerged from the mists of ancient China, passed down through generations like precious jade. Others bloomed in the concrete gardens of our contemporary world, in boardrooms and therapy offices, in kitchens where families gather, in studios where artists wrestle with the mystery of creation. All of them whisper the same essential truth: there is a way of being that flows like water, powerful in its gentleness, unstoppable in its yielding nature. As I share these tales, I invite you to listen not just with your mind, but with that deeper knowing that recognizes truth when it hears it. Let these stories wash over you like rain on parched earth, allowing them to seep into the places within you that remember what it means to move in harmony with life's natural rhythm. The master archer who forgot to aim. In the mountains of ancient China, there lived an archer whose reputation had spread like morning mist through every valley. People journeyed from distant provinces to witness his skill, for it was said that he never missed his target. Yet when they arrived, expecting to see elaborate techniques and fierce concentration, they found something altogether different. I remember watching this master one autumn morning, the air crisp with the promise of winter. A young student had come, eager to learn the secrets of perfect marksmanship. The student's hands gripped his bow with white-knuckled intensity, his jaw clenched with determination, his eyes fixed on the distant target with the focus of a hunting hawk. "Teach me to aim as you do, master," the student implored, his voice tight with effort. The old archer smiled, an expression as gentle as falling leaves. "First," he said, "you must forget everything you know about aiming." He lifted his own bow, weathered hands settling around it like old friends reuniting. But instead of the rigid stance the student expected, the master's body seemed to soften, to merge with the landscape around him. I watched as something extraordinary unfolded. The archer's breathing deepened and slowed until it matched the rhythm of the wind through the pine branches. His shoulders dropped, releasing tension the student didn't even realize he was carrying. His eyes, rather than boring into the target with laser-like intensity, seemed to embrace the entire scene, the target, yes, but also the trees behind it, the birds wheeling overhead, the quality of light filtering through the canopy. "Feel the bow breathing with you," the master murmured. "Feel the arrow eager to fly, not driven by your will, but drawn by its own nature toward its destination." The student frowned, confusion creasing his young face. "But master, how can the arrow know where to go if I don't aim it there?" The old archer drew back his bowstring, and I could see that he wasn't pulling it so much as allowing it to draw itself back, like a breath naturally deepening. "When you and the bow and the arrow and the target are no longer separate things," he whispered, "when you become the entire moment of flight, then there is no one to miss and nothing to be missed." The arrow released itself with a sound like a sigh, and found its mark with the inevitability of water flowing downhill. The student practiced for months under the master's guidance, gradually learning to soften his grip, to breathe with his whole body, to trust the intelligence that emerges when effort gives way to presence. The transformation was remarkable to witness. As his need to control diminished, his accuracy increased. As his desperation to succeed faded, success began to find him naturally. Years later, when the student had become a master himself, he would tell his own pupils, "Skill is not about forcing the arrow to your will. Skill is about becoming so present, so unified with the moment, that your action arises from the same source as the flight of birds and the turning of leaves toward sunlight." This is Wu Wei, not the absence of action, but action so aligned with the natural order that it appears effortless. This story lives in me as a reminder that mastery in any field, whether archery or parenting, whether leading a team or creating art, emerges not from increased control, but from deepened presence. When we stop trying to muscle our way to success and instead allow our actions to arise from a place of centered awareness, we discover capabilities we never knew we possessed. Take a moment to reflect. Where in your life are you gripping too tightly, aiming too hard? What would happen if you softened your grip and trusted the intelligence that emerges in presence? Can you recall a time when you performed at your best not through intense effort, but through a state of relaxed focus? The executive who discovered the power of emptiness. Sarah Chen's corner office on the 42nd floor overlooked the city like a command center, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting her image back at her, a woman who had climbed every rung of the corporate ladder through sheer force of will. For 15 years, she had been the person who made things happen, who pushed projects forward through obstacles, who turned around failing departments through strategic pressure and relentless drive. When I first encountered her story, she was at the peak of her success by conventional measures, yet she felt as though she were drowning in shallow water. Her team, though productive, seemed brittle, their creativity stifled by the constant urgency she generated. Meetings had become battlegrounds where the loudest voice won, and innovation happened despite the environment she had created, not because of it. The transformation began during what Sarah later called her accidental retreat, a week-long power outage that stranded her at a remote conference center during a corporate planning session. With no Wi-Fi, no phone service, and nothing but candles for light after sunset, she found herself in an enforced stillness that initially felt like torture. "I had never experienced such silence," she told me later. "At first, I was climbing the walls, trying to figure out ways to get messages to my team, to stay in control. But by the third day, something shifted. I started actually hearing the other executives when they spoke, instead of just waiting for my turn to respond." During that week of unexpected quiet, Sarah began to notice patterns she had been too busy to see. She observed how the most productive conversations happened not during the formal sessions she tried to control, but in the margins, during walks, over meals, in the gentle spaces between agenda items. She watched how ideas seemed to germinate naturally when people felt safe to think out loud, to explore half-formed thoughts without fear of judgment. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the interplay of shadow and moonlight on the mountains, a memory surfaced from her childhood. She remembered her grandmother's garden, how the old woman would spend hours simply sitting among her plants, not pruning or weeding or doing anything that looked like work, just being present. Young Sarah had thought her grandmother was being lazy, but now she understood that this quiet attention was itself a form of cultivation. When the power returned and the group resumed their planning, Sarah found herself experimenting with a radically different approach. Instead of driving every conversation toward predetermined outcomes, she began creating space for unexpected insights to emerge. Instead of immediately offering solutions when problems arose, she asked questions that invited her colleagues to discover answers themselves. The change was subtle but profound. She started meetings not with packed agendas, but with moments of silence that allowed everyone to truly arrive in the room. She learned to sit with uncomfortable pauses, trusting that something valuable would emerge from the emptiness rather than rushing to fill it with her own words. She discovered that her most powerful tool as a leader wasn't her ability to have all the answers, but her capacity to hold space for collective wisdom to unfold. Within 6 months, her department's metrics told a story that surprised even the skeptical executives above her. Employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically, not because she had implemented new policies, but because people felt truly heard and valued. Innovation increased as team members felt safe to propose ideas that might fail. Client relationships deepened because her team was listening more attentively rather than just trying to close deals. I realized I had been leading like a bulldozer, Sarah reflected, when what my organization needed was someone who could create fertile ground for natural growth. The power I discovered in emptiness, in not having to have all the answers, in not needing to control every outcome, was far greater than anything I had accessed through force. Her transformation rippled outward in ways she never anticipated. Other departments began requesting meetings with her team, curious about the shift in energy they could feel even from a distance. Senior executives started asking her to facilitate sensitive negotiations because of her newfound ability to help others find common ground without taking sides. Sarah's story reveals how leadership through Wu Wei isn't passive or weak, it's powerfully active in creating conditions for others to flourish. She learned that true authority comes not from dominating conversations, but from creating space where the best in people can naturally emerge. As I contemplate her journey, I'm reminded that in our culture of constant action and immediate response, we often underestimate the transformative power of spaciousness. Sarah discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is nothing, to resist the urge to fill every silence, solve every problem, or direct every outcome. What spaces in your life could benefit from more emptiness, more room to breathe? Where might you be leading with too much force, when what's needed is the creation of fertile ground for natural growth? Can you remember times when your most profound insights or connections emerged not from trying hard, but from relaxed attention? The Gardener and the Seasons of the Soul. Miguel Santos had been fighting his depression for 3 years when I learned of his story, fighting it like a warrior battles an enemy, with medication and therapy and self-help books stacked like ammunition beside his bed. He approached his healing with the same determination he had once brought to his career as a software engineer, creating systems and tracking progress and measuring outcomes. Yet the harder he fought, the more entrenched his sadness seemed to become. His apartment felt like a fortress against feeling, blackout curtains blocking natural light, delivery boxes piling up because leaving felt too overwhelming, the television providing constant noise to drown out the silence where his despair lived. Miguel had organized his entire life around avoiding the very experience that was asking for his attention. The shift began when his sister, worried about his isolation, gave him a small potted basil plant. "Just try to keep it alive," she said gently. "Don't think of it as a project. Just notice it occasionally." Miguel placed the plant on his kitchen windowsill more to appease his sister than from any real interest. But something about its presence began to work on him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The plant didn't demand anything dramatic, it simply existed, quietly doing what basil plants do, reaching toward the filtered light that managed to slip through his half-drawn blinds. After a few days, he noticed the soil was dry. Watering it became the first intentional act he had performed in weeks that wasn't about fixing himself or managing his symptoms. As he poured water into the pot, he found himself actually looking at the plant, really seeing its small, green leaves, the way they seemed to vibrate with quiet aliveness. That plant became my teacher in a way nothing else had, Miguel later told me. It didn't try to be anything other than what it was. It didn't judge itself for growing slowly, or feel guilty for needing water, or get frustrated with the limited light in my apartment. It just did what it needed to do to survive, one day at a time. Gradually, Miguel began opening the curtains a little wider, noticing how the plant responded to increased light with visible gratitude. He started paying attention to its cycles, how some days it seemed to surge with growth, while other days it appeared to rest, consolidating its energy. He began to recognize that both phases were necessary, that the plant's stillness wasn't failure or stagnation, but an essential part of its natural rhythm. Inspired by the basil's quiet wisdom, Miguel began to treat his own healing differently. Instead of fighting his low days, he started viewing them as winter seasons of the soul, necessary periods of dormancy that might be preparing ground for new growth. Instead of berating himself for not feeling better faster, he began to honor his natural timing, allowing some days to be about rest and others about gentle action. He expanded his windowsill garden slowly, learning about different plants and their needs. Succulents taught him about resilience and the ability to thrive with minimal resources. A spider plant showed him how growth often happens in unexpected directions. A peace lily demonstrated the relationship between proper care and natural blooming, how forcing flowers to appear was impossible, but creating the right conditions made flowering inevitable. The transformation was gradual, like watching a plant grow, imperceptible day by day, but undeniable over time. Miguel began taking short walks to a nearby nursery, then to a community garden where he volunteered a few hours each week. The simple act of tending plants connected him to something larger than his personal struggle, to the ancient rhythm of growth and rest, death and renewal that governs all living things. I realized I had been treating my depression like a problem to solve, Miguel reflected, when maybe it was more like soil that needed patient tending. Some of my sadness was old grief that needed to decompose into wisdom. Some of it was exhaustion from years of trying to be someone I wasn't. The garden taught me that healing happens in seasons, not in straight lines. His relationship with difficult emotions began to shift fundamentally. Instead of experiencing anxiety as an enemy to defeat, he learned to see it as information about areas of his life that needed attention. Instead of viewing sadness as failure, he began to understand it as a natural response to loss and change that, when acknowledged rather than suppressed, could compost into compassion and depth. Miguel's healing journey illustrates a profound truth about Wu Wei, that sometimes the most effective action is allowing natural processes to unfold rather than forcing premature solutions. Like a gardener who understands that plants have their own timing, he learned to work with his inner seasons rather than against them. His story reminds me that in our quick-fix culture, we often expect healing to happen on our timeline rather than on life's timeline. Miguel discovered that accepting the natural rhythms of recovery, the slow periods and the growth spurts, the times of dormancy and the moments of sudden blooming, actually accelerated his healing in ways that fighting never could. Where in your life might you be fighting natural cycles rather than honoring them? What would it look like to tend your challenges like a garden rather than attack them like an enemy? Can you identify the seasons in your own healing journey, recognizing that winter is as necessary as spring? The therapist who healed through presence. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been trained in the finest therapeutic techniques, her office walls lined with certificates that attested to her mastery of cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and trauma-informed care. For 7 years, she had approached healing like a skilled surgeon, diagnosing problems and applying precise interventions to create change in her clients' lives. Her success rate was impressive by any measure, yet she felt increasingly disconnected from the work that had once called to her soul. The shift began with Marcus, a veteran whose PTSD had proven resistant to every evidence-based treatment in her arsenal. Session after session, she had guided him through exposure therapy, taught him grounding techniques, and helped him reframe traumatic memories. He complied with every homework assignment and practiced every skill she offered, yet something essential remained untouched, like a song playing just below the frequency of her methods. During what would become a pivotal session, Elena found herself setting aside her clipboard and treatment plan. Marcus had been describing a recurring nightmare with his usual detached precision when something in his voice, a barely perceptible tremor, caused her to forget everything she had planned to say. Instead of launching into her prepared intervention, she simply sat with him in the silence that followed his words. For the first time in years of practice, Elena later told me, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't formulating responses or searching for the right technique. I was just there with him, feeling the weight of what he was carrying, allowing his pain to exist in the room without rushing to transform it. In that silence, something shifted. Marcus's carefully maintained composure began to soften, like ice melting under warm sunlight. Tears came, not the careful, therapeutic tears he had shed in previous sessions, but the raw, unguarded grief of a soul finally finding safe harbor. Elena found herself crying too, not from sadness but from the profound privilege of witnessing a human being's authentic pain without feeling compelled to immediately ease it. You're the first person who hasn't tried to talk me out of how I feel, Marcus whispered. You're just here with it. This moment awakened something in Elena that all her training had somehow obscured, the recognition that healing often happens not through what we do, but through how we are. She began to experiment with what she privately called presence practice, learning to trust the intelligence that emerges when two people meet in authentic encounter without agenda. She started arriving at her office 15 minutes early, sitting in meditation to clear the residue of her own concerns so she could be fully available to each client. She learned to listen with her whole body, noticing not just the words her clients spoke but the quality of energy they carried, the rhythm of their breathing, the stories told by their posture and gestures. Her sessions began to transform in ways that surprised both her and her clients. Instead of following rigid treatment protocols, she found herself responding moment by moment to what was actually happening in the room. Sometimes this meant sitting in silence for long periods. Sometimes it meant asking questions that arose not from her theoretical knowledge but from genuine curiosity about the unique person before her. With Maria, a client struggling with anxiety, Elena discovered that the breakthrough came not through teaching coping strategies but through helping her notice the places in her body where she felt safe and expansive. With James, who had been battling addiction, the turning point arrived when Elena stopped trying to motivate him to change and instead held space for him to explore his ambivalence without judgment. I realized I had been approaching therapy like a mechanic approaches a broken car, Elena reflected. I was looking for problems to fix rather than recognizing that each person already contains their own healing intelligence. My job isn't to impose solutions but to create conditions where their natural wisdom can emerge. Her colleagues began to notice changes not just in Elena's effectiveness but in her presence. The driven, slightly anxious energy she had carried for years softened into something more grounded and spacious. Clients started referring friends specifically to her, saying they couldn't quite articulate what was different about her approach, but they felt truly seen and heard in her presence. Elena's transformation illustrates how Wu Wei applies to the helping professions, how sometimes the most therapeutic thing we can offer is not our knowledge or techniques, but our willingness to meet another person exactly where they are without trying to move them somewhere else. She learned that healing often emerges from the quality of relationship rather than the application of methods. Her story reminds me of an ancient truth, that sometimes the most powerful intervention is non-intervention, that presence itself can be profoundly transformative. Elena discovered that when she stopped trying so hard to heal people, they found their own way to wholeness more naturally. This wisdom extends far beyond therapy rooms. In our relationships with children, partners, friends, and colleagues, we often rush to fix and advise when what's truly needed is our full attention and acceptance. Elena's journey shows us that love, whether professional or personal, is often most effective when it creates space rather than applying pressure. Where in your relationships might you be trying too hard to help or change others? What would it feel like to offer your presence as a gift rather than your solutions as a prescription? Can you remember times when someone's simple presence was more healing than any advice they could have given? The mother who stopped pushing the river. Jennifer Walsh had approached motherhood the way she approached everything else in her life, with detailed planning, thorough research, and unwavering determination to get it right. Her firstborn, Emma, had been enrolled in enrichment classes before her first birthday. By age 4, Emma's schedule looked like a corporate executive's calendar: Montessori school, violin lessons, swimming, Mandarin language classes, and weekend science camps that Jennifer had carefully selected to optimize her daughter's development. Jennifer's kitchen counter was covered with parenting books that promised to unlock every child's potential, and she had implemented their strategies with the dedication of a devoted student. She tracked Emma's milestones against developmental charts, celebrated each early achievement, and worried intensely about any area where Emma seemed to lag behind her peers. Love, in Jennifer's mind, meant ensuring her daughter had every possible advantage in an increasingly competitive world. The wake-up call came during Emma's 5th birthday party, a carefully orchestrated event that Jennifer had spent weeks planning. She had hired an educational entertainer, prepared organic, allergen-free snacks, and structured activities designed to be both fun and developmentally appropriate. But as she watched Emma during the party, she noticed something that stopped her cold. Her daughter seemed to be performing joy rather than feeling it, going through the motions of celebration with the same dutiful compliance she brought to her violin practice. Later that evening, as Jennifer tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked quietly, "Mommy, do you love me when I'm not being good at things?" The question landed in Jennifer's heart like a stone in still water, creating ripples of recognition that continued expanding for days afterward. She began to see how her well-intentioned efforts to optimize Emma's potential had created an atmosphere where love felt conditional on achievement, where being enough required constant improvement and excellence. That night, Jennifer sat in her daughter's doorway after Emma fell asleep, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, and felt something crack open inside her. She saw how her own childhood, raised by ambitious parents who measured worth through accomplishments, had programmed her to believe that love meant pushing, that care required constant intervention and improvement. The transformation began with small experiments in letting go. Jennifer canceled one activity from Emma's schedule, then another, watching carefully for signs that her daughter was falling behind or becoming bored. Instead, she discovered that Emma began to play more creatively, to initiate her own projects, to express preferences that Jennifer had never known she had because there had never been space for them to emerge. She started what she privately called following practice. Instead of directing Emma's afternoon activities, she would ask what interested her and then find ways to support those natural inclinations. When Emma became fascinated with bugs, instead of enrolling her in a formal entomology class, Jennifer simply made time for backyard explorations and trips to the library to check out books about insects. The change in Emma was remarkable. The dutiful compliance began to soften into genuine enthusiasm. Her creativity flourished when given unstructured time and space. Most importantly, she began to trust her own interests and instincts, developing an inner compass that Jennifer's constant guidance had inadvertently obscured. "I realized I had been treating Emma like a garden that needed constant pruning and fertilizing," Jennifer later told me, when what she actually needed was room to grow in her own direction, in her own timing. "My job wasn't to shape her into who I thought she should become, but to provide the conditions where she could discover who she actually was." The practice extended beyond parenting as Jennifer began to examine other relationships where she had been unconsciously pushing the river. She noticed how she tried to manage her husband's moods, how she gave unsolicited advice to friends, how she approached even her own self-care with the same goal-oriented intensity that had characterized her parenting. Learning to trust Emma's natural development taught Jennifer to trust life's natural unfolding more broadly. She began to see how many of her anxieties stemmed from believing that things wouldn't work out unless she intervened, controlled, and optimized constantly. Emma became her teacher in the art of allowing, showing her mother how naturally children learn and grow when given love, safety, and freedom. Jennifer's story illuminates how Wu Wei applies to parenting and all nurturing relationships. She discovered that children, like plants, have their own innate intelligence about what they need to thrive. Her role shifted from director to supporter, from shaper to witness of Emma's natural becoming. The ripple effects extended throughout their family. Jennifer's husband, seeing how she had relaxed into trusting Emma's development, began to worry less about career advancement and started enjoying his work more fully. Their marriage deepened as Jennifer stopped trying to optimize their relationship and started appreciating what naturally existed between them. Emma, now 8, moves through her days with a confidence and self-knowledge that astonishes the adults around her. She advocates for her own needs, pursues her interests with genuine passion, and seems to trust that she is loved simply for being herself rather than for becoming someone else's vision of who she should be. Jennifer's journey reminds us that love often expresses itself most purely through trust in another person's timing, their natural intelligence, their inherent wholeness. She learned that the deepest gift we can offer those we care about is the space to become themselves rather than our projects for improvement. Where in your relationships might you be pushing too hard, trying to improve or direct others rather than trusting their natural unfolding? What would it feel like to love someone by creating space for them to be themselves rather than trying to shape them into your vision of who they could become? Can you remember times when you felt most supported? Was it when someone was trying to change you, or when they were accepting you exactly as you were? As these stories settle into the quiet spaces of your own experience, notice what resonates, what stirs something recognizable in your own journey. Each tale carries within it seeds of possibility, invitations to experiment with new ways of being in your own unique circumstances. The wisdom is not in copying what others have done, but in recognizing the universal principles that express themselves differently through each life. The Archer teaches us about the power of presence over force. Sarah shows us how leadership transforms when we create space rather than apply pressure. Miguel demonstrates how healing unfolds when we work with our natural rhythms rather than against them. Elena reveals how helping others is most effective when we trust their innate wisdom. Jennifer illustrates how love flourishes when we stop trying to improve it and start allowing it to be itself. All of these stories point toward the same truth: there is an intelligence in life that knows how to flow, how to grow, how to heal, how to connect. Our role is not to direct this intelligence but to align with it, not to force outcomes but to create conditions where natural goodness can unfold. Practice moving through your day as if you were walking through a garden, noticing what wants to grow, what needs water, what requires patience. Trust that the same wisdom that guides seasons and tides and the healing of wounds is also available to guide your choices, your relationships, your creative expression. You are not separate from the natural order, you are an expression of it, as capable of effortless flowering as any plant that turns towards sunlight without trying. 30 Days of Gradual Awakening. The morning mist rises from the valley below my window as I write these words to you, and I am reminded of how transformation happens in nature, not in violent bursts, but in gentle, persistent ways. The dew doesn't force itself onto the grass, it simply arrives when conditions are right. The flower doesn't struggle to bloom, it follows an ancient rhythm written in its very essence. This is how we must approach our own awakening to Wu Wei. Not as conquerors storming a fortress, but as gardeners tending to seeds that carry within them everything needed to flourish. What I offer you now is not a rigid program, but rather a gentle framework, 30 days of coming home to yourself, one breath at a time. I have walked this path for countless seasons, and I have learned that lasting change happens in the space between effort and surrender. Too much pushing, and we create resistance. Too much passivity, and nothing shifts. But in that sweet spot, their magic unfolds. Week 1, Cultivating Awareness. In this first week, we begin where all wisdom begins, with seeing. Not the harsh, judging gaze that dissects and criticizes, but the soft, curious attention of a child watching clouds form and dissolve in an endless sky. Each morning, before the world pulls you into its urgent demands, I invite you to sit quietly for just 10 minutes. Find a place where you feel held, perhaps by your bedroom window, or in a corner of your garden where the light falls just so. Close your eyes and simply notice what is here. Notice the quality of your breath without trying to change it. Is it shallow or deep? Hurried or leisurely? There is no right way to breathe in this moment, there is only your way, right now. Notice the sensations in your body. Perhaps there is tension in your shoulders, carrying yesterday's worries. Maybe your stomach feels fluttery with anticipation of the day ahead. Whatever is present, let it be exactly as it is. This is radical practice in our culture of constant improvement. We are so accustomed to immediately fixing, adjusting, optimizing whatever we find. But true awareness requires a different kind of courage, the courage to simply witness without immediately jumping into action. As you move through your day, set a gentle alarm to sound every 2 hours. When it chimes, pause for just 30 seconds and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking? How is my body? Not to change anything, but simply to touch base with your inner landscape, the way you might glance at the sky to notice if clouds are gathering. I remember walking through a marketplace years ago, observing how the vendors who were most successful weren't the ones shouting loudest or pushing hardest. They were the ones who seemed most present, most attuned to the subtle cues of their customers. They had developed the capacity to read the energy of each interaction and respond accordingly. This is what we cultivate in this first week, this quality of responsive awareness. Before sleep each evening, spend a few minutes reflecting on what you noticed throughout the day. Perhaps you discover that you hold your jaw tightly during difficult conversations. Maybe you realize that your mind spins fastest in the moments just after waking. Write these observations in a journal, not as problems to solve, but as landscapes to explore. By the end of this first week, you may notice something curious happening. The very act of witnessing, without the pressure to change, often creates space for natural shifts to occur. The breath deepens on its own. The shoulders drop without effort. This is Wu Wei at its most fundamental, allowing awareness itself to be the catalyst for transformation. Reflection points. What patterns am I beginning to notice in my inner landscape? How does it feel to observe without immediately trying to fix or change? What happens in my body when I simply allow what is present to be here? Practice. Set 3 random alarms throughout your day. When they sound, take 3 conscious breaths and notice 1 physical sensation, 1 emotion, and 1 thought, without judgment or the need to change anything. Week 2, releasing the grip of control. If the first week was about developing the capacity to see, this second week is about learning to let go of what we discover. I often think of this process like unclenching a fist that has been closed so long we forgot we were even holding anything. The places where we grip most tightly are often the places where we feel most vulnerable. We control because we care, because we're afraid, because somewhere along the way we learn that if we don't manage every detail, everything will fall apart. But what if this very gripping is what creates the tension we're trying to avoid? Begin each morning this week with what I call the inventory of control. Sit quietly and scan through the various areas of your life. Where are you trying to control outcomes? Perhaps you're managing every detail of a work project, convinced that without your constant oversight it will fail. Maybe you're attempting to orchestrate family dynamics, believing that everyone's happiness depends on your careful orchestration. Make a gentle list, not to shame yourself, but to simply acknowledge where your energy is going. I like to imagine these areas of control as places where I'm trying to hold back the ocean with my bare hands. The ocean isn't wrong for flowing, and my hands aren't wrong for trying to stop it, but there's a fundamental mismatch between the effort and the nature of what I'm working with. Choose 1 small area each day to practice what I call conscious release. If you typically script every word of important conversations, try entering one interaction with only a clear intention and trust in your ability to respond authentically in the moment. If you usually plan every detail of your evening routine, experiment with leaving space for spontaneity. This isn't about becoming careless or irresponsible. There's a difference between letting go of control and letting go of care. We can care deeply while holding outcomes lightly. We can prepare thoroughly while remaining open to different ways things might unfold. I remember a student who came to me frustrated because his attempts to help his adult daughter weren't working. The more advice he offered, the more she pulled away. "I just want what's best for her," he said, and I could hear the love beneath his words. Together, we explored how his caring had become entangled with controlling, how his desire to spare her pain had become a barrier to her own growth. Learning to love without controlling became his practice, perhaps one of the most challenging and liberating practices there is. Throughout this week, notice what happens in your body when you begin to loosen your grip on outcomes. You might feel fear, or relief, or both simultaneously. This is natural. We're rewiring ancient patterns, and the nervous system needs time to adjust to new ways of being. Reflection points. Where am I trying to control outcomes out of love versus fear? What would change if I could care just as much while holding results more lightly? How does my body feel when I practice letting go versus when I'm gripping tightly? Practice. Each day, choose one area where you typically try to control the outcome. Instead of your usual management approach, set a clear intention and then consciously release attachment to how things unfold, staying open and responsive to what actually emerges. Week 3. Tuning into your inner compass. By now, you may notice that releasing control creates space, and into that space, something subtle begins to emerge. It's what I call the inner compass, that quiet knowing that exists beneath the noise of our anxious thinking. This third week is about learning to recognize and trust this deeper guidance. Your body is constantly receiving and processing information that your mind hasn't yet registered. The slight tightening in your chest when someone isn't being truthful. The way your energy expands around certain people and contracts around others. The gut feeling about which path to take at a crossroads. This is intelligence, not separate from rational thinking, but complementing it. Each morning this week, before checking your phone or reviewing your schedule, place one hand on your heart and one on your belly. Take several slow breaths and ask your body, how do I want to approach today? Not what you think you should do, or what others expect, but what feels most aligned with your deepest knowing. You might receive an answer in words, or as an image, or simply as a quality of energy. Perhaps your body communicates that today is a day for gentle persistence. Maybe it signals that this is a time for bold action, or for patient waiting. Trust whatever arises, even if it doesn't make logical sense initially. Throughout the day, continue to consult this inner compass before making decisions, both large and small. When someone invites you to lunch, pause and check, does this feel expansive or contractive? When you're about to send an email, notice, is this coming from clarity or reactivity? When you're choosing how to spend your evening, ask, what would feel most nourishing right now? This isn't about becoming impulsive or ignoring practical considerations. It's about including body wisdom in your decision-making process. Some of my most aligned choices have come from following guidance that initially seemed illogical but ultimately proved deeply wise. I think of a friend who had built a successful career in finance but felt increasingly drained by her work. Her mind presented dozens of practical reasons why she couldn't change course, but her body consistently signaled that something was off. When she finally listened to that inner guidance, she discovered a passion for teaching children, eventually transitioning into education. The path wasn't easy, but it felt like swimming with the current instead of against it. As you develop this capacity to sense and follow inner guidance, you may notice that life begins to feel more synchronistic. Opportunities appear at just the right moment. Conversations happen exactly when you need them. This isn't magic, it's what becomes possible when we align with the natural intelligence that flows through all things. Reflection points. What does my inner compass feel like in my body? How is this different from anxiety or wishful thinking? What happens when I honor these subtle signals versus when I override them? Practice. Before any decision this week, from what to eat for breakfast to how to respond to a challenging email, pause and ask your body what feels most aligned. Notice the quality of different options in your physical experience, and practice choosing based on what creates expansion rather than contraction. Week 4. Living in the Flow. In this final week, we weave together everything you've been cultivating, awareness, release, and inner attunement, into a more integrated way of moving through daily life. This is where practice becomes less of something you do and more of who you are. The quality I'm pointing toward is like that of a skilled sailor who has learned to work with wind and current rather than against them. There's still skill involved, still attention and care, but it's all in service of cooperation with larger forces rather than domination over them. Begin each morning by setting what I call a fluid intention for the day. Unlike rigid goals, these intentions remain open to how they might manifest. Perhaps you intend to contribute something meaningful at work, without being attached to exactly what form that contribution takes. Maybe you intend to connect authentically with loved ones, while staying open to how those connections might unfold. Throughout the day, practice what I think of as responsive action, moving from a place of presence and attunement rather than habit or reactivity. When your colleague seems stressed, instead of immediately offering advice or solutions, first pause and sense what might be most helpful. Sometimes it's listening. Sometimes it's sharing a resource. Sometimes it's simply offering your calm presence. In conversations, experiment with speaking from the same place you've been accessing in your morning check-ins with your inner compass. Before responding, take a breath and ask, what wants to be said here? Not what you think you should say, or what would make you look good, but what would serve the highest good of this interaction. This week, you'll likely encounter situations that test your newfound capacity to flow rather than force. Perhaps a project at work hits unexpected obstacles. Maybe a relationship dynamic triggers your old patterns of control. These moments are not failures, they're opportunities to practice returning to center, to remember that there's always another way to approach whatever is arising. I'm reminded of a conversation with an artist who had been struggling with creative blocks for months. She had been trying to force inspiration, setting rigid schedules and berating herself when the muse didn't appear on command. When she shifted to showing up consistently at her easel while releasing attachment to what emerged, something beautiful began to happen. Not every day produced a masterpiece, but there was a quality of aliveness in her work that hadn't been there when she was trying so hard. By the end of these 30 days, you may find that Wu Wei is no longer something you're trying to practice but something you're beginning to embody. The pause between stimulus and response becomes more natural. The capacity to hold your preferences lightly while engaging fully becomes more accessible. The trust in your own deeper knowing becomes more steady. Reflection points: how has my relationship with effort and action shifted over these 30 days? What does it feel like to engage fully while holding outcomes lightly? Where do I still notice myself reverting to old patterns of force and control? Practice. Each evening this week, reflect on moments when you felt most in flow during the day. What conditions supported this state? How can you create more of these conditions tomorrow? Notice how your energy feels different when you're forcing versus when you're flowing. As we complete this month-long journey together, I want to acknowledge something important. This is not an ending, but a beginning. You have planted seeds of awareness, watered them with practice, and begun to see the first tender shoots of transformation emerging from the soil of your daily life. The path of Wu Wei is not about achieving some final state of enlightened effortlessness. It's about returning, again and again, to this quality of responsive presence, this capacity to dance with life rather than wrestle with it. There will be days when you forget everything you've practiced, when you find yourself gripping and forcing and struggling against the current. This too is part of the path. What matters is not perfection, but the growing ability to recognize when you've veered off course and the knowing that you can always, in any moment, take a breath and begin again. The river is always here, ready to teach you about the power of flowing around obstacles rather than through them. The seasons continue their ancient rhythm of expansion and contraction, reminding you that all of life pulses with this same essential wisdom. Trust the process you've begun. Trust the seeds you've planted. And most of all, trust the deeper intelligence that flows through you, waiting patiently for you to remember that you were never separate from the source of all flowing in the first place. The path that is walked by walking. Here we are, at what some might call an ending, though I prefer to think of it as a doorway opening onto the endless garden of your becoming. After walking together through these pages, exploring the ancient wisdom of water over stone, you may notice something has shifted in the quality of your attention, the rhythm of your breathing, the way you hold space for uncertainty. The morning light filtering through my window as I write these words carries the same golden patience it has carried for countless millennia. It doesn't hurry to illuminate the world, yet darkness has no choice but to yield to its gentle persistence. This is the nature of true transformation, not the dramatic breaking of old forms, but their gradual dissolution in the presence of something more luminous and alive. You began this journey perhaps searching for techniques, strategies, ways to make your life work better. What I hope you've discovered instead is that you already are the flow you've been seeking to understand. The river doesn't need to learn how to move around stones, this knowledge lives in its very essence. Similarly, the art of Wu Wei isn't something foreign you must acquire, but rather the natural intelligence of your being, waiting to be uncovered beneath layers of learned striving and cultural conditioning. I think of the countless students who have approached me over the years, their faces tight with the effort of trying to grasp the ungraspable. Master Lao, they would say, how do I practice non-action? How do I achieve effortlessness? The very urgency in their questioning revealed the beautiful paradox we all must navigate, the ego's desire to control even the process of letting go. One autumn afternoon, as crisp leaves danced on wind currents without consulting any manual on proper falling technique, a young woman approached with tears of frustration. I've been meditating for months, she confessed, trying to stop my thoughts, trying to force peace, but my mind seems more chaotic than ever. I invited her to sit beside me on a weathered stone bench and simply watch the leaves spiraling down from the ancient oak above us. Tell me, I asked softly, how did that leaf know to release its hold at precisely the right moment? How does it trust the air to carry it safely to earth? She watched in silence for several minutes before a small smile began to soften her features. It doesn't think about it, she whispered. It just knows when it's time. This is the essence of integrating Wu Wei as a living practice rather than another item on your spiritual to-do list. The leaf doesn't struggle against autumn, yet it doesn't resign itself to passive decay. In its surrender to seasonal timing lies perfect responsiveness, what the ancient texts call acting in accordance with the natural order. Reflection: notice right now, as you read these words, how your body knows how to breathe without your micromanagement. What other aspects of your daily life already demonstrate this natural wisdom? As you begin to embody this understanding more fully, you'll discover that practice and lifestyle gradually merge into a seamless way of being. There's no longer a division between spiritual time and regular life, between moments of wisdom and moments of ordinary existence. The same presence that transforms your meditation cushion into sacred space begins to infuse your conversations, your work, your way of moving through crowded marketplaces and quiet forests alike. I remember watching a master calligrapher create characters that seemed to flow from brush to silk as naturally as water finding its course downhill. When I asked about her technique, she laughed with genuine surprise. Technique? I simply become empty enough for the character to write itself through my hand. The brush knows what it wants to say, I just provide it with willing cooperation. This willing cooperation with life's creative intelligence becomes the foundation of sustainable practice. Instead of forcing yourself through rigid routines that feel like spiritual boot camp, you begin to sense what your soul is hungry for each day. Some mornings call for vigorous movement, others invite gentle stillness. Some seasons of your life require bold action, others ask for patient incubation. Wu Wei teaches you to read these subtle signals with the same fluidity that experienced sailors read wind and current. Reflection: what practices naturally attract you when you're not trying to be disciplined? What does your body crave when you listen without judgment to its wisdom? Yet let's speak honestly about the inevitable moments when you'll find yourself swimming upstream again, caught in the familiar current of old patterns. This isn't failure, it's human. The path of natural action includes compassionate return to center after periods of losing your way. The river doesn't judge itself for temporarily getting caught behind a fallen log, it simply finds a new channel. I've watched students torture themselves with shame when they notice they've slipped back into control mode, as if spiritual growth should be a linear progression toward perfect effortlessness. But even the seasons don't move in straight lines. Winter often returns with unexpected storms even as spring flowers are beginning to emerge. Your journey toward greater flow will have its own seasons of apparent regression and breakthrough. When you catch yourself forcing outcomes again, gripping tightly to expectations, trying to make life conform to your timeline rather than dancing with its rhythm, treat these moments as beloved teachers rather than evidence of personal failure. They're simply knocking on the door of your awareness, reminding you gently, remember, dear one, there's another way. Reflection: how might you speak to yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who was struggling with old habits? The beauty of this practice is that even the noticing is enough to begin shifting your state. You don't need to perfectly execute some technique for returning to flow. Often, simply pausing to take 3 conscious breaths while acknowledging your current experience with gentle honesty creates enough space for natural realignment to occur. I think of a businessman who approached me after a particularly stressful period in his company. I keep forgetting everything you've taught about Wu Wei, he confessed. When the pressure builds, I automatically revert to pushing and controlling and driving everyone harder. And what happens, I asked, in the moment you realize you've forgotten? He paused, then smiled with recognition. I remember again. And usually, I can feel my shoulders dropping and my breath deepening just from that remembering. Then you haven't forgotten at all, I replied. You've simply discovered that remembrance itself is the practice. This is why I encourage you to think of this approach as a gradual homecoming rather than an achievement to be conquered. You're not adding another layer of complexity to your already full life. You're slowly peeling away the learned behaviors that obscure your natural wisdom, like clearing debris from a stream so its essential movement can be revealed. Practice. For the next week, experiment with this gentle return to center. Whenever you notice tension, forcing, or the familiar grip of trying too hard, simply pause and whisper internally, I remember another way. Notice what happens in your body and breathing without trying to change anything. As your daily life increasingly reflects these principles, you may find that others are drawn to the quality of presence you carry. This isn't about becoming a teacher or guru, a trap that catches many sincere practitioners. Rather, it's about allowing your own authentic peace to ripple outward naturally, the way a calm lake reflects moonlight without effort. People often ask how they can help others discover this path of effortless action. My response is always the same: live it yourself with such genuine enjoyment that others become curious about what you found. The most powerful teaching happens not through words but through the magnetic quality of a life lived in harmony with natural rhythms. I recall a mother whose family relationships were transformed not because she lectured her husband and teenage children about Taoist philosophy, but because she stopped trying to control their choices and instead focused on creating a home atmosphere of acceptance and peace. Within months, family dinners became genuine conversations instead of battlegrounds. Her teenagers began seeking her guidance rather than avoiding her questions. Her marriage rediscovered intimacy that had been buried under years of trying to change each other. This is how the Tao spreads through the world, not through missionary zeal but through the irresistible attraction of people who have learned to live with less struggle and more joy. You become a walking invitation to remember what's possible when we stop fighting the river of existence. Reflection: in what areas of your life do you already model a more flowing, accepting approach? How do others respond to this quality in you? Perhaps you're wondering about deepening this journey, discovering resources and practices that can support your continued unfolding. The beautiful paradox is that once you truly grasp the essence of Wu Wei, you'll find teachers everywhere, in the way cats stretch after napping, in how storms pass through without clinging to the sky, in the patient way bread rises when given enough time and warmth. The ancient texts offer endless layers of wisdom for those called to study them more deeply. The Tao Te Ching rewards decades of contemplation, revealing new meanings as your understanding matures. The Zhuangzi delights with stories and paradoxes that slice through mental complexity with the precision of a master chef's knife. Modern teachers who embody these principles can offer contemporary applications and personal guidance. Yet remember that the most profound teachings often come through direct experience rather than intellectual accumulation. The afternoon you spend watching clouds reshape themselves teaches you about impermanence more viscerally than volumes of philosophy. The morning you wake up naturally, without alarm clocks, demonstrates perfect timing more clearly than any lecture on Wu Wei. I encourage you to trust your own magnetism to draw exactly the resources you need at each stage of your journey. The right book will find its way to your hands, the appropriate teacher will cross your path, the perfect practice will present itself when you're truly ready to receive it. This itself is an expression of Wu Wei, allowing your learning to unfold organically rather than frantically collecting spiritual experiences like trophies. Practice. For the next month, pay attention to what naturally attracts your curiosity about living with greater flow. Notice which books call to you from library shelves, what conversations unexpectedly offer insight, which practices your body craves. Trust this natural guidance over external recommendations about what you should be doing. As we approach what linear thinking calls the end of this conversation, I want to offer you an invitation to make a gentle commitment to yourself, not a rigid vow that creates pressure, but a loving intention that honors your desire to live with greater ease and authenticity. Perhaps it's as simple as choosing to pause for 3 conscious breaths before responding to stressful situations. Maybe it's committing to 1 walk per week without destinations or agendas, simply following where your feet want to wander. It might be dedicating the first 10 minutes of each day to sitting quietly and listening to what your soul wants to communicate before the world makes its demands. The form matters less than the sincerity. What's important is choosing some small, sustainable way to regularly remember and reconnect with the flowing intelligence that guides rivers to the sea and seasons through their eternal dance. Let this commitment feel like coming home to yourself rather than adding another burden to your already full life. I think of the commitment as planting a seed that will grow according to its own perfect timing. You don't need to know what the mature plant will look like, you simply need to provide consistent, gentle attention. Water it with patience. Give it sunlight through your presence. Trust that it contains within itself all the information needed for its full flowering. Reflection: what gentle commitment feels most nourishing and sustainable for your life right now? How can you honor your desire for greater flow without turning it into another form of pressure? My friend, as these words draw toward their completion, I'm struck by the profound ordinariness of what we've explored together. The path of natural action isn't mystical in the sense of being separate from everyday life. It's mystical because it reveals the sacred nature of what we've always taken for granted: breathing, walking, listening, responding from the heart rather than the head's endless calculations. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are not behind schedule in some cosmic curriculum. You are not required to transform yourself into someone fundamentally different. You are invited, simply and radically, to become more completely who you already are beneath the learned layers of effort and anxiety. The morning light that began these final reflections has now shifted to the softer gold of afternoon, reminding me that even as we complete this particular conversation, the larger dialogue between your soul and the universe continues moment by moment. Each breath is a fresh opportunity to choose flow over force. Each interaction offers a new chance to respond rather than react. Each sunrise presents another invitation to begin again with the wonder of a child discovering the world for the first time. There's nowhere else you need to arrive, nothing more you need to accumulate, no one else you need to become. The pathless path opens directly beneath your feet, exactly where you stand right now. The river of your life knows precisely where it wants to flow, your only task is to stop pushing it uphill. Walk gently, dear friend. Trust deeply. Allow the path to unfold as paths do, one step at a time, revealing itself not to your planning mind but to your willingness to move forward without needing to see the whole journey mapped out in advance. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, but the life that can be lived in harmony with its flowing wisdom. That life is yours to discover and enjoy, starting with this very moment, starting with your very next breath. Practice. As you close this book and return to your daily life, carry with you this simple question: what wants to happen next? Ask it with genuine curiosity rather than anxiety. Listen with your whole being for the answer. Then take the smallest possible step in that direction, trusting that the path will continue to reveal itself as you walk it. The ancient pine outside my window has grown magnificently not by studying how to be a tree, but by remaining true to its pine nature season after season. May you do the same with your precious human nature, growing not into who you think you should be, but into the fullest expression of who you have always been. This is the pathless path, the gateless gate, the effortless effort that transforms ordinary life into art. Welcome home to yourself, fellow traveler. The river is waiting for your gentle return.